Thalia Rome Goethe, the second princess of the Rome Empire, was often told she looked just like an angel. Her lavish palace chambers, filled with glimmering light, prepared the princess for the day's grand event. Warm sunlight streamed through ornate windows, illuminating intricate details of the room. Vanity items, exquisite perfumes and brushes awaited her transformation. A loyal maid carefully attended to the princess, meticulously styling her long blonde hair. Smiling, the maid remarked how she truly looked exactly like the legendary Lady Genevieve. Such constant comparisons, however, sparked a flicker of annoyance in the princess. With a sharp pull, her hand ended the maid's ministrations, demanding her dress at once. The maid froze, startled, a brush still in her hand as her smile faltered. Blue eyes, usually soft, now held a steely glint of impatience and deep-seated ambition. Presented then was a magnificent gown, its fabric shimmering with royal elegance. "Elle, look at this," the maid stammered, holding up the garment with awe in her voice. Quiet intensity settled on the princess's face as she gazed at the dress, recognizing its profound significance. This was the very gown Lady Genevieve, her own mother, had worn when first entering the imperial palace. Fondly, the maid reminisced, asking if the princess remembered her mother wearing it so long ago. A brilliant flash of light filled the air, a memory of her mother's dazzling entrance into their lives. Lady Genevieve had indeed looked utterly out of this world on that momentous day. Captivating an empire, that woman was a vision of unparalleled beauty and grace. Even the emperor himself, a man of immense power, had been unable to tear his eyes away. Their union, a moment of profound public adoration, was etched into the annals of history. The maid continued, assuring the princess that this special dress had been prepared just for her. Fierce determination burned in the princess's gaze, reflecting her desire to embody that same power. Patiently, the maid helped her adorn intricate jewelry and final touches of the magnificent gown. Fully dressed, the princess stood radiant, a striking resemblance to her legendary mother. Gazing into the mirror, her eyes gleamed with a complicated mix of longing and fierce resolve. More than anything, she wanted to look even more beautiful than her mother, if such a thing were possible. Every eye in the room, she yearned, should be fixed solely on her, acknowledging her presence. Distant figures of courtiers reflected in her blue eyes, their attention soon to be hers alone. The princess's ultimate goal, ensuring no one would even spare a glance at someone like Isla, her detested half-sister. An intense hunger for validation and supremacy stirred within her, a silent roar for control. Instinctively, her hand reached for a ceremonial dagger, a symbolic gesture of her inner fight. A sharp crash echoed as the maid dropped the mirror, startling both of them. Before the broken glass, the princess stood, her reflection fractured, a symbol of her splintered reality. Walking past the shattered pieces, she left behind the distorted image of her ambition. The moment wasn't just about beauty, it was about erasing the stain of what she considered a filthy affair. Declaring her sickness of the old mirror, the princess demanded a new one, perhaps one that would reflect a different truth. Broken fragments on the floor mirrored the painful past, her father and Isla's mother entwined. Her reflection in the shards was a fragmented image of herself, consumed by the lingering shadow of that shameless sin. This painful legacy, product of her father's infidelity, had not disappeared, even after all these years. A cold resolve settled deep in her heart, a promise that this shame would persist as long as she did. The Forgotten Field, Chapter 1. Outside, a carriage pulled up to the grand entrance of the palace, signaling the evening's start. Inside the hall, musicians played a gentle melody, setting a deceptively peaceful atmosphere. Calmly, the princess sat in her carriage, her expression carefully composed, preparing for her grand entrance. Biting her finger in contemplation, the weight of the upcoming banquet rested heavily on her mind. Within the bustling hall, nobles gathered, their hushed murmurs filling the air with anticipation. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the princess made her dramatic, long-awaited appearance. Despite the grand entrance, she felt an invisible barrier around her, as if her very presence was a plague. Count Syrian, a charming noble, stepped forward, offering her a respectful bow and a warm smile. Meeting his gaze, she offered a subtle, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of his boldness. Her father's palace, she thought, was her rightful place, where she had every right to command attention. A haunting memory flashed. Isla, spitting up the emetic the princess had given her, a cruel prank. The princess recalled Isla, covered in the red liquid, looking as though she were spilling her own bright red heart. Truly wonderful, the princess mused, if she could have actually made that happen. Her hand tightened around the goblet she held, a dark wish for Isla's demise swirling within her. Never again, she wished, would Isla open her eyes, a grim fantasy born of bitter jealousy. Count Syrian approached, extending his hand, his eyes filled with admiration for the princess. With a gentle touch, he kissed her hand, a gesture of respect and subtle defiance in front of the watchful court. He then remarked that every man in the room was looking at her, struggling to suppress their desire. Leading her to the center of the hall, the count prepared to begin their dance, a challenge to unspoken rules. Accepting his hand, she made a silent agreement to defy the expectations of the court. Gracefully, they began to dance, a flowing rhythm that drew all eyes to them. The princess realized he was truly skilled, his movements confident and elegant, matching her perfectly. Other nobles watched, their faces a mixture of surprise and disapproval, but their gaze remained fixed. The princess reveled in the attention, feeling a surge of power as she commanded the room. Their captivating dance continued, a defiant display against the backdrop of the court's judgment. A triumphant, almost defiant, expression graced her face as she held the spotlight. A herald announced the entrance of Gareth Roam-Girta, the crown prince, and Isla Roam-Girta, the first princess. Isla and her twin brother Gareth entered the hall, drawing all attention as nobles offered their congratulations. Pausing their dance, the princess and Count Syrian watched their moment stolen by the new arrivals. Whispers rippled through the crowd, their focus shifting to the crown prince and first princess. An internal struggle raged within the princess. She refused to be compared to them, to be overshadowed. Her eyes narrowed, a silent fury burning as she watched her half-sister bask in the limelight. Varkas Rayed-Gosiarkan, the commander of the Roam Imperial Guard, was then formally announced. Stepping forward, he offered a formal greeting to Gareth and Isla, his future bride. A strange magic pulsed around the princess, her hand twitching with a suppressed urge to lash out. Isla smiled sweetly, extending her hand to Varkas, a picture of grace and happiness. The princess's eyes glowed with barely contained rage, a storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Count Syrian, sensing her turmoil, gently touched her arm, advising her to leave the banquet hall. Nobles watched with bated breath, their eyes darting between the two princesses, anticipating a confrontation. Gareth approached the princess, his face dark with disapproval, asking what brought her here. Returning his greeting with a chilling smile, she acknowledged her lovely sister as well. Isla, feigning concern, offered her sympathies about the princess's recent ill health. The princess sensed the veiled insult, feeling Isla viewed her as utterly worthless. Regrettably, she thought, she had not used a lethal poison instead of a mere emetic, wishing for Isla's true demise. Gareth's face twisted in disgust, his voice laced with contempt as he demanded why she dared show her face. The princess retorted, asserting her right to be there, finding his indignation almost comically human. Vulgar? She challenged, finding his words quite harsh, especially regarding her mother's dress. Reminding him, she stated that her dress was the one her mother had worn when she first met their father, a deeply meaningful garment. Isla and Varkas stood together, radiating an aura of official importance and joy. Isla then announced the official date for her marriage to Varkas had finally been set. Detailing her upcoming pilgrimage, she spoke of her departure to join House Syarkan, making her exit from the imperial palace permanent. Isla, with a saccharine smile, expressed her wish to bless her sister's future before she left. The princess's face twisted in a mixture of shock and disbelief as the full weight of the announcement hit her. Isla then deliberately dropped her goblet, and a splash of red liquid covered her white dress. With a sinister smile, Isla blessed her sister, wishing her to end up looking just like this, a horrifying curse. The world of royalty was a gilded cage, filled with silent battles and hidden intentions, especially for those navigating its treacherous halls. For Leticia, the weight of her sister's cruel wish echoed in her mind, to see her broken, just like this, stained with blood. Her brother, Sayarkan, stood over her, his face a mask of rage, his voice a harsh accusation. His grip was brutal, twisting her arm until she cried out, the pain a sharp, visceral shock. He dragged her away, his powerful form a dark silhouette against the fading light, leaving her no chance to resist. Another blow landed, sending her reeling, the agony almost too much to bear as the world spun. Looking up, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief, she could only utter his name. His gaze was unyielding, filled with a cold fury as he told her she simply didn't understand the boundaries she'd crossed. He seized her wrist, his fingers clamping down with crushing force, making her gasp. The pressure intensified, a silent threat that spoke volumes about his disdain for her. A pained cry escaped her lips, the torment evident in every strained muscle. Still holding her captive, he questioned how much further she intended to fall before finding satisfaction in her own ruin. The scene shifted perhaps to another memory or a more recent past, where she stood by her brother's side, outwardly composed. He asked if her lowest point hadn't been enough. Our hero met his words with a defiant glint in her eyes, challenging his perception of her rock bottom. She looked at him with an icy calm, dismissing his high-handed attitude, calling him Noble Lord Siakan. With a subtle smirk, she questioned if he truly understood the meaning of rock bottom, implying his experience paled in comparison to hers. His grip tightened on her arm once more, a silent warning, yet she barely flinched. He leaned in, his voice low, stating that perhaps from his elevated position she did indeed appear quite low. Yet, a fierce resolve burned in her eyes as she silently declared she was still far from her worst. Her blue eyes shimmered with an unsettling light, reflecting a depth that few could comprehend. Within that gaze lay an endless abyss, a swirling vortex of pain and defiance. This terrifying void was a place she knew intimately, a consequence of the life she was forced to lead. She foresaw her inevitable fall, pushed into that abyss by the very man who claimed her as his brother. If that was her fate, then she would leave her mark, clawing at his future before she succumbed entirely. He, too, burned with a cold, almost demonic fire, believing only such a brutal exchange could be considered fair. A new figure emerged, the kind and loyal Varkas, reaching out to her in her moment of quiet despair. She looked at him, her voice tired, asking simply to change her clothes. She asked him if he could escort her out of the suffocating banquet hall, away from the watchful eyes. He gently took her hand, his steady presence a small comfort in the chaos. They began to walk away, leaving him to observe their departure with a simmering resentment. He confirmed his loyalty, assuring her that he would grant her wish. Our hero cast one last sharp glance back, her expression unreadable but full of defiance. Our guy watched them go, a frustrated huff escaping his lips, clearly displeased by her exit. Her loyal companion addressed her once more, his tone respectful and concerned. Another man, perhaps an advisor to her brother, approached her, suggesting it would be best for her to leave the hall immediately. She turned to him, her eyes questioning, challenging his authority. She reminded him that the first princess herself had told her to enjoy the banquet to her heart's content, implying she wasn't done yet. Her enjoyment, she declared, was far from over. The man, admiring her boldness, still cautioned her, his gaze flicking towards her brother. He warned her that the beast behind her, referring to her brother, looked ready to pounce, highlighting the danger she was in. His eyes glowed with barely contained fury, a silent roar echoing his primal rage. Later, in a carriage, she sighed, the weight of the evening settling upon her. She was simply tired. The carriage continued its journey, the rhythmic clatter a deceptive lull. A sudden, jarring movement, and a foot landed firmly inside, disrupting the peace. She gasped in surprise, her body thrown off balance as something unexpected occurred. She fell, her elegant dress disheveled, the shock of the moment evident in her wide eyes. Her voice trembled as she questioned what was happening, her confusion clear. He was suddenly there, looming over her inside the carriage, his presence chilling. He looked down at her, his expression a cold mask as he questioned the meaning of her actions. Our hero struggled, a choked sound escaping her lips as she tried to comprehend the unfolding horror. His foot pressed down on her, a casual act of dominance that spoke volumes. He declared that they barely tolerated her existence, enduring her presence only through sheer restraint. His hand closed around her throat, a brutal symbol of his control. He reminded her they had suffered her for a very long time, his voice laced with venom. She gasped for air, her eyes wide with terror as he spoke of their endless endurance. They had held it in, he finished, restraining themselves again and again from this very act. Blood appeared at her lips as she choked, the assault leaving her gasping and weak. He leaned closer, his eyes cold and devoid of pity, a cruel smirk on his face. He warned her not to provoke them further, his words a chilling threat. His final words were a devastating blow. They already hated her enough. She coughed weakly, barely clinging to consciousness, the pain and the words echoing through her. Her brother exited the carriage, his hands stained with her blood, his face still grim. As her loyal companion rushed forward, calling out her title in alarm, the true horror of what had just happened became clear. What would she do now that her brother had finally shown his true colors? Thalia, a young girl, found herself in a lavish but unsettling new home, her mother proudly declaring it her palace. Her mother's smile was bright, almost too bright, as if trying to mask the true nature of their new surroundings. She urged Thalia to rejoice, but the words felt hollow in the vast, echoing space. The grim faces of the servants lurking in the shadows did little to reassure her. A deep unease settled over the girl, her wide, innocent eyes reflecting a growing fear. Grand halls stretched endlessly, bathed in a cold, ethereal light that offered no warmth. She felt a profound sense of isolation, surrounded by opulence that felt more like a cage. The sheer scale of it all was terrifying, a silent scream trapped in her young mind. The servants watched her with an unsettling stillness, their presence adding to the suffocating atmosphere. Overwhelmed, the girl turned and fled the suffocating grandeur, seeking any escape from the crushing weight of her new reality. She found herself outside, in the relentless rain, where a small fallen bird lay shivering on the muddy ground. The sight of the helpless creature halted her flight, drawing her gaze with a quiet sadness. This ruined garden was once vibrant, but her mother had uprooted every flower and tree to erase traces of the former empress. She looked down at the tiny bird, wondering if it had fallen from one of the few remaining branches. As she stepped closer, her foot slipped on the wet, unstable ground, sending her tumbling with a soft cry of pain. Her eyes widened in surprise and a hint of frustration as she landed in the cold mud. Now covered in dirt, she sat there, feeling completely undone and utterly alone. A deep sigh escaped her lips, lamenting her soiled dress and the mess she had become. She knew it was silly to feel such regret over a ruined outfit, especially when a small, helpless life lay before her. Still, the little bird, barely chirping, seemed to mirror her own lost and abandoned state. She watched him intently, the rain still falling, unsure of what to do next. A quiet fear crept in. Had it already succumbed to the cold and the fall? Her expression softened with concern, hoping against hope that she hadn't arrived too late. The desperation in her eyes was clear, a silent plea for the small creature's survival. To her immense relief, the bird stirred, a tiny wheeze confirming it was still alive, clinging to a thread of life. Gently, she cupped her hands around him, offering what little warmth she could. A faint chirp escaped the bird, a fragile sound of gratitude or perhaps just a plea for comfort. He nestled into her palms, a small, trusting gesture that resonated deeply with her own longing for connection. This baby bird, having lost its nest, was abandoned by its mother, a reflection of her own unspoken plight. The tiny form rested safely in her hands, a precious, fragile burden. "Are you cold?" she whispered, her voice laced with a tenderness she rarely got to express. A small, hopeful smile bloomed on her face as she cradled the bird, finding a flicker of joy in protecting something so vulnerable. The rain continued to pour, and she realized her predicament, wondering how she could help the bird and herself. The ground, already soft from the downpour, crumbled under her slightest movement, making any escape difficult. The heavy rain created a mournful symphony around her, amplifying her sense of helplessness. Tears welled in her eyes, not just for the bird but for her own inability to navigate this new, harsh world. From the shadows beneath a large tree, a hooded figure observed her, his presence a stark contrast to the desolate scene. His gaze was intense, though his expression remained unreadable beneath the hood, a silent question in his piercing blue eyes. She looked up, startled by his sudden appearance, her tear-streaked face reflecting a mixture of fear and faint hope. The hooded figure watched her for a long moment, assessing her predicament without a word. He stood on a ledge, looking down at her trapped in the muddy pit, the gap between them physical and symbolic. "Can't you tell?" she called out, her voice shaky. "I fell into this pit and can't get out." He simply asked why she had ventured into such a dangerous place to begin with, his tone devoid of judgment but full of quiet observation. With a soft squelch, he stepped down from the ledge, his boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. He moved towards her with deliberate, measured steps, the mud clinging to his boots with each movement. His approach was steady, a silent promise of assistance in her desperate situation. He extended a hand towards her, a simple gesture of help, cutting through the rain and the silence. Our boy watched her, his expression a mix of concern and expectation, waiting for her response. She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the small bird in her own, a dilemma playing out in her young mind. "I can't," she said softly, unable to take his hand while holding the vulnerable creature. She explained that she was holding something in her hands, something she couldn't let go of. He asked if what she held was important, his gaze unwavering, trying to understand her priorities. She admitted it wasn't, not in the grand scheme of things, but her grip on the bird remained firm. His eyes briefly glowed with an unusual power as he suggested she simply throw it away. But she couldn't. Even if it wasn't important to the world, she just couldn't bring herself to abandon it. What would he do now? A mysterious figure in a hooded cloak, shrouded in shadow, stood as the world around him seemed to twist with dark energy, hinting at the forgotten fields he guarded. A young noblewoman, caught in a sudden downpour, found herself in the arms of a stranger, his quiet command to stay still, barely audible over the rain. The sudden splash of water startled her, a gasp escaping her lips as she realized the stranger was protecting her from the worst of the storm. Her wide blue eyes blinked in surprise, still processing the unexpected embrace and the strange man who held her so gently. She looked down at her small, clasped hands, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks as she tried to compose herself in his arms. Through the pouring rain, the hooded man continued to carry her, his steady steps unfaltering as he sought shelter. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable beneath the hood, a hint of weariness in his eyes as the rain continued to fall. The young miss, now covered in mud, felt a pang of guilt, realizing he had gotten dirty because of her. He kept walking, each step a soft squelch in the soaked earth, carrying her deeper into the sheltering woods. The girl offered to compensate him, promising the new outfit, much more expensive than his own, and a generous reward from her servant. She proudly declared her noble lineage, emphasizing her status as the daughter of a very great person, believing this would impress him. His reaction was not what she expected. He simply smirked, finding her boastful claims amusing, a tiny thing yet so arrogant. A deep flush spread across her face, mortified by his dismissive attitude, wondering how he dared speak to her, the emperor's daughter, like that. He set her down under a large tree, then turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the rain, a strange sense of abandonment washing over her. The sound of his boot hitting the ground echoed in the sudden quiet, marking his departure and her isolation. He paused, looking back at her from a distance, a silent question in his gaze as if waiting for her next move. Curiosity overcoming her indignation, she called out, asking what he was holding in his hands, sensing something delicate in his care. He revealed a small, mud-soaked bird, its tiny form still and vulnerable in his palm, a stark contrast to his rough exterior. The sight of the injured creature softened her heart, her earlier anger forgotten in an instant, replaced by concern. He looked at her, his eyes holding a quiet intensity, as if gauging her reaction to the fragile life he held. Gently, he lifted her up, bringing her closer so she could see the little bird, sharing its plight with her. Looking at his cold fingers, she asked how long he had been standing out in the rain, holding the bird. She leaned in, a thoughtful expression on her face, about to share a secret, a quiet intimacy forming between them. Then she told him, with a childlike wonder, that there were silver crowns in his eyes, a comment that visibly surprised him. He processed her words, his gaze distant, perhaps seeing himself in a new light or simply pondering the innocence of her observation. His expression remained pensive, the rain still falling, as if her simple comment had unlocked a deeper thought within him. The heavy downpour continued, the sound of the rain a constant backdrop as he looked up, lost in thought. The young miss also looked up, her bright blue eyes reflecting the gray sky and the falling rain, a mirror to his own contemplation. Their eyes, both reflecting the sky, seemed to connect in that moment, a silent understanding passing between them. He asked her, his voice softer now, what she had found in his eyes, genuinely curious about her unique perception. A sudden, blinding light and a loud shout pierced the quiet, shattering their moment of connection as her nanny called out for her. He held her tighter, his gaze fixed on the approaching figure, a protective instinct momentarily overriding his usual detachment. The nanny, frantic and worried, rushed towards them through the rain, her voice filled with relief and exasperation. The young miss looked down, her face clouded with sadness, knowing her time with the hooded man was over. He watched her, a quiet understanding in his eyes, recognizing the inevitable separation that now loomed. He gently offered the injured bird to her, a small gesture of trust and shared responsibility. She looked at the little creature, her heart aching for its fragile life, wanting to help but feeling helpless. He looked from her to the bird, a silent plea in his gaze for her to take care of it, to continue the kindness he had started. The tiny bird chirped weakly in his hands, its small sound a poignant reminder of its vulnerability. She hesitantly reached out, her small fingers brushing against his, a tentative connection forming. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, making the exchange feel more personal and meaningful. He held her close, shielding her from the rain, a silent comfort in their final moments together. His hand extended, an offering, a choice, to take this responsibility or leave it behind. A shiver ran through her, the cold seeping into her bones, making her decision even more urgent. She asked him if he would take the bird with him, her voice small but hopeful, wanting it to be safe. She explained her reasoning. Her hands were too cold, but his were warm, implying he could provide better care. Their hands met, intertwining around the little bird, a shared moment of tenderness and responsibility. The small bird rested in their joined hands, a symbol of their unexpected connection and mutual concern. He looked at her, his expression softening, a silent promise in his eyes that he would protect the creature. She gazed up at him, her blue eyes wide with trust, completely reliant on his word. His gaze met hers, a quiet assurance passing between them, affirming his commitment. She asked him, her voice filled with a child's innocent hope, if the little bird would truly be able to live. He simply said, yes, a firm and comforting promise that eased her worried heart. Her small shoes began to move, taking her away from the hooded man and back to her own world. She hurried away, a faint blush still on her cheeks, but a new lightness in her step. She ran, her eyes glancing back, unable to fully leave the encounter behind. Her steps were quick, but her heart remained with the hooded man, a lingering feeling of wonder. Under the tree, the hooded figure stood motionless, watching her disappear into the distance. She looked back one last time, a fleeting moment of connection across the growing distance. His gaze remained fixed on her, a silent farewell in his steady eyes. She wondered, with a touch of curiosity and longing, why he didn't leave, why he stayed to watch her. He stood, a solitary figure in the rain, his presence a silent anchor in her memory. Her cheeks flushed again as she turned away, the realization of his prolonged gaze affecting her more than she expected. Her feet hesitated, a moment of reluctance before she continued on her way. Her small steps continued, carrying her further from the quiet sanctuary of the woods. Suddenly, a hand grabbed hers, pulling her sharply forward, snapping her out of her reverie. Her nanny, scolding and worried, pulled her along, her voice filled with exasperation at the young miss's disappearance. The nanny's firm grip and hurried pace left no room for lingering, forcefully bringing her back to her duties. She was practically dragged away, the nanny's urgent steps echoing the strict demands of her royal life. As she was pulled away, the young miss cast one final, longing glance back, the image of the hooded man and the small bird etched into her heart, a silent promise of a return to the forgotten field. The imperial palace was a flurry of activity, with servants and guards moving large chests and preparing for a significant event. A man called out instructions, urging his fellow workers to be careful with the luggage, ensuring everything was handled with precision. Elsewhere, another group of people worked to lower heavy items, the sounds of their efforts echoing through the bustling grounds. In just a few days, the first princess and the crown prince would embark on their sacred pilgrimage, a journey that demanded careful preparation. This pilgrimage was a time-honored rite of passage, a tradition for all descendants of Darian, the great emperor who founded the Rome Empire, upon reaching adulthood. Traditionally, women undertook this journey before marriage, while men typically began theirs after turning 20, marking a significant milestone in their lives. This time, however, the first princess and the crown prince were to go together, as they had been born on the exact same day and at the same time. Their shared birth date was considered a sign that they should receive God's blessing simultaneously, making their joint pilgrimage a unique and special occasion. All the luggage was being packed for two, the first princess and the crown prince, signifying the scale and importance of the upcoming journey. The person chosen to bear full responsibility for escorting them was Commander Varkas, the revered leader of the Rome Imperial Guard. Our princess sat by her window, lost in thought, her gaze drifting towards the world outside as the preparations continued. Her mind wandered, recalling a day long ago when rain poured down just as it often did, bringing with it a flood of bittersweet memories. A young boy, drenched and alone, had once stood in the rain, his pale hair glistening with moisture, a stark image etched in her mind. He had looked up, his expression a mix of sorrow and resignation, leaving a lasting impression on her young heart. The princess, as an adult, carried a profound sense of longing, her eyes reflecting a deep well of unspoken emotions. Back in her childhood, she sat alone in a grand room, the silence amplifying her solitude. That day, neither her father nor her mother had shown up, leaving a young princess with a profound sense of abandonment. A deep regret had settled in her heart, a quiet ache that words could not fully capture. She wished she had just followed him. After that day, she often wandered the rear garden whenever she found a chance, hoping to recapture a fleeting moment. But despite her persistent searching, she never met that boy again, leaving her with a lingering question and a sense of loss. The memory of his hand, warm against hers, was a stark contrast to the cold loneliness that now enveloped her. She shivered, feeling a chill deep within her, a sensation that mirrored the emotional coldness of her world. The sound of rain beating against the window brought her back to that day, making her wonder if the boy had been a hallucination. She questioned if he was merely a figment of her lonely imagination, someone who didn't actually exist. The next morning, she was led through the palace corridors, her small figure dwarfed by the grand architecture. Her eyes widened as she heard the clashing of swords from the training grounds, the sound drawing her curiosity. A young man with light hair and serious eyes stood among the trainee knights, practicing with a wooden sword. Her attendant then asked if she knew who they were, drawing her attention to the group. He explained that they were trainee knights preparing to join the prestigious Rome Imperial Guard. All of them were children from noble families, their features seemingly set in stone. But her gaze was fixed on one specific trainee, the boy she had met that rainy day. The attendant urged her to hurry, reminding her that His Majesty was waiting, but her focus remained elsewhere. Our princess felt a pang of resentment towards her father, the man who had taken her mother away from her. Her father, the emperor, sat at his desk, his expression stern and unyielding as he wrote. He informed her that from now on, she must learn imperial etiquette, a duty she accepted with quiet resignation. She watched him, keenly aware that he wouldn't even look at her, a painful truth she had long understood. The emperor had no interest in her, a reality that deeply hurt our princess, despite her outward composure. He further announced that he had found several excellent teachers for her, emphasizing the importance of her education. Despite looking exactly like the mother he loved so much, he still treated her with an emotional distance that felt like a chasm. He instructed her to come to the main palace before noon for her lessons, a new routine that would fill her days. She would need to do her absolute best to catch up on the studies she'd fallen behind on, a daunting task for a young girl. The princess walked away, her steps echoing faintly in the grand hall, carrying the weight of her father's indifference. She often wondered if the boy would be there tomorrow, her hope a fragile light in her lonely world. The next day, she carried her book, her small figure determined as she walked through the palace. She scurried along, her pace quickening with a sense of anticipation as she approached the training grounds. There, she peered through the window, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He was there, among the other knights, training with a focused intensity that captivated her. She watched him, her heart fluttering with recognition. It was him, the boy from that rainy day. He helped another trainee up, a simple act of kindness that confirmed the gentle nature she remembered. After that day, she was able to see him every time she went to her lessons, a small comfort in her structured life. She often pondered the fate of the bird they had found together, wondering if it had died. Perhaps he had buried it somewhere, a quiet act of remembrance for a small creature. Or maybe he had released it, allowing it to fly far away once it had regained its health, a symbol of freedom. She wondered if his eyes, those captivating blue eyes, still reflected silver crowns, just as they had that day. An adult woman, regal and beautiful, stood behind her, her presence a striking contrast to the princess's introspective mood. The woman leaned in, asking what she was looking at so intently, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity. Our princess turned, seeing the boy from her memories, now a grown man, standing nearby. The woman then revealed his identity, stating he was the son of Grand Duke Sierkan, a powerful noble. A shocking question followed, one that would change everything. Do you want that child? The world of Grand Duke Sierkan, a powerful figure, was a realm of intricate politics and hidden intentions. Our little princess, Elia, once thought he was merely a young noble from a high-ranking family, unaware of the deeper currents swirling around him. Her mother, now the empress, held a chilling, calculating gaze that always seemed to weigh the worth of everything she saw. Within the vast, opulent halls, her mother's presence was grand, yet distant, a stark contrast to the warmth Elia craved. A soft touch on our girl's face felt less like affection and more like a possessive gesture, leaving her with a blush born of discomfort. Empress spoke to her, but words carried an underlying coldness, a transactional tone that chilled Elia to the core. Even a kiss from her mother brought no comfort, just the heavy weight of sadness in her heart, a feeling that something precious was lost. Mother's hand lingered on her face, but the gesture was devoid of genuine love, a clear sign that Elia was seen as an object, not a cherished child. Dangerous duels and fierce competitions were a common sight in the palace, hinting at the ruthless world her mother now inhabited. Shrouded in dark, blood-red roses, the empress seemed to emerge from a more sinister realm, her intentions obscured. With a chilling smile, she made her offer. I could give that child to you, the words echoing with unsettling implications. Nothing came without a cost. Her mother's sharp gaze made it clear, but not for free. Elia was then commanded to please her parents if she wanted any reward, a veiled demand for obedience and performance. Forced to sit at a grand desk, a book open before her, the weight of expectations pressed down on her small shoulders. Our girl's wide, innocent eyes welled with unshed tears, her cheeks flushed with a mix of fear and overwhelming sadness. In a sudden, desperate act of defiance, her small hand pushed the heavy book away, a silent protest against her gilded cage. Running, her tiny figure became a blur as she fled from the empress, seeking escape from the suffocating pressure. Why am I running away? She wondered, her steps echoing her internal turmoil, questioning her own desperate flight. Down the long, lonely hallway, a profound ache settled in, missing her mom every night and longing for her old comfort. That cold, evaluating look in her mother's eyes, as if she were constantly weighing Elia's worth, was truly terrifying. Remembering a time, back at House Taran, she could endure anything, knowing her loving mother was always there for her. Now, her mother was the empress, a distant, regal figure, sharing a throne with the emperor, far removed from Elia's world. The new palace felt like an unfamiliar place, filled with unfamiliar people, leaving her utterly isolated and vulnerable. Alone in her vast bed, our girl cried silently, the immense loneliness, a heavy blanket suffocating her small heart. Her tiny form was swallowed by the enormous bed, emphasizing her profound isolation within the grand, empty room. A memory surfaced then of a hooded boy standing in the pouring rain, a fleeting moment of unexpected kindness. Even in her sadness, that memory of him brought a flicker of light, a small hope she clung to in the dark. Daily life involved rough rituals. Maids scrubbed the skin with stiff brushes, the touch impersonal and harsh. Inside the bath, attendants cleaned her without tenderness, their movements brisk and uncaring, treating her like a doll. Painful force was used to comb her hair, each tug a reminder of the lack of gentle hands in her life. Wincing, tears pricked her eyes from the discomfort, but she endured it, a small silent victim of her new routine. Surrounded by maids, she sat passively, beautifully dressed, yet entirely devoid of joy, a prisoner of her own appearance. Despite the exquisite clothes and floral headband, her expression remained sorrowful, a stark contrast to her outward beauty. Starting her search, she walked alone through the long, quiet hallways, her small steps filled with a fragile determination. Out in the vibrant palace gardens, she continued her quest, the beauty of the flowers unable to lift her heavy spirits. Peeking cautiously from behind a tree, she hoped to spot him, a tiny figure lost in a vast and indifferent world. Standing alone on a sunlit path, our girl looked tired, her small shoulders drooping with exhaustion and discouragement. Despair deepened as a darting gaze searched every corner, but the boy was nowhere to be found. Physical toll mounted, her legs ached, and she instinctively reached up to rub her head, overwhelmed. On her foot, a painful blister had formed, a small testament to her arduous journey and growing desperation. Looking down, her face etched with weariness, a profound sense of defeat began to settle over her. "Why am I so obsessed in the first place?" she questioned, a flicker of doubt about her desperate pursuit. Yet, a quiet resolve settled over her features, a firm, unwavering, no, she would not give up. She vividly recalled the day, pouring rain, when she had fallen into a pit, helpless and alone. Then, a hooded figure appeared, a stranger who could have easily walked past but chose not to. Coming down into the mud, he pulled her out without hesitation, his clothes ruined, but his kindness unwavering. Holding her in his warm arms, he looked directly into her eyes, a genuine connection that pierced through her loneliness. He even picked up a dying bird, cradling it gently, a profound display of compassion for all creatures. Just that alone, she thought, realizing the immense weight of his simple, selfless acts in her desolate world. Uncertainty flickered. Should I go back? She wondered, her conviction wavering for an instant. Bright and determined, her eyes affirmed her path. She would continue. She had to find him. Then, a figure in the distance, his back turned, but his presence was unmistakable, a beacon of hope. Walking through the sun-dappled garden, a quiet, solitary form moved, unaware of the desperate search closing in on him. With a joyous exclamation, our girl's face lit up. "That's him!" The relief washing over her in a powerful wave. He turned slightly, his stoic profile a familiar sight, now a promise of comfort in a world that had offered her so little. This was only the beginning. The real storm hasn't hit yet. A forgotten field held secrets, but for one young princess, it held a singular hope. Our young princess had been searching for a long time, and finally, her quest seemed to be at an end. Across the sun-dappled path, she spotted the figure she'd been longing to find, quickly giving chase. She called out, her voice a hopeful whisper, but he kept walking, seeming not to hear her at all. Each step he took widened the distance between them, pulling him further into the hazy light. Her small lungs burned, and her legs ached, yet she pushed on, refusing to give up on her pursuit. Then, her foot caught and she stumbled, losing her precious momentum and falling behind. She looked up, her expression a mix of shock and a dawning sadness as she watched him disappear. The path ahead was now empty, the figure she pursued having vanished from her sight. She scanned the surroundings, a desperate hope clinging to her as she searched for any sign of him. Defeated, she sank to the ground beneath a tree, the quiet garden reflecting her somber mood. Her shoulders slumped, and a deep sense of dejection settled over her, weighing heavily on her heart. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and she slowly lifted her head, a soft, ethereal light catching her eye. Something in the air had shifted, a faint memory stirring within her, pulling her back in time. Her gaze drifted, lost in a sudden, vivid recollection of a moment that had shaped her longing. She remembered a different time, a vibrant garden where the young man sat with another girl. From a distance, she watched this scene unfold, her heart clenching with an unspoken yearning. The other girl was radiant, her laughter echoing through the air as she gestured happily. Our boy looked at her with an easy smile, a warmth in his eyes that the princess rarely saw directed at herself. It was a smile that spoke of comfort and shared happiness, a stark contrast to her own lonely reality. The princess felt a pang of intense jealousy, her world suddenly tinged with a painful violet hue. They were perfectly content, a picture of serene joy that excluded her completely, leaving her on the outside. He seemed entirely absorbed in the other girl's presence, oblivious to anything beyond their shared moment. She stood there, an unseen observer, yearning for just a sliver of his attention. All she wanted was for him to turn, to acknowledge her existence, if only for a second. But his gaze remained fixed elsewhere, his expression unreadable, and she felt invisible. He never looked her way, never even seemed to sense her presence, and that hurt more than she could say. Our princess stood just a few feet away, yet felt a world apart, a profound loneliness washing over her. His eyes, though beautiful, held no recognition for her, erasing any hope she had of being remembered. A knot formed in her stomach, a nervous tremor running through her as she tried to reassure herself that everything would be fine. She forced a brave smile, reminding herself of her status, hoping it would somehow bridge the chasm between them. With a deep breath, she took a step closer, her gaze fixed on the ground, fearing the outcome. A crushing thought began to form. Did he truly not remember her, despite all her efforts? Perhaps it was her appearance from a past encounter, one she couldn't quite shake from her mind. The joyful memory shattered, replaced by a darker, more violent one that sent shivers down her spine. His past self, consumed by a terrifying rage, screamed at her, a sound that pierced through her very being. Powerful energy surged around him, threatening to tear everything apart, a destructive force unleashed. She watched in horror, completely unable to comprehend the sudden, terrifying shift in his demeanor. The other girl desperately clung to him, pleading for him to stop the overwhelming power he wielded. But his anger only intensified, his demand echoing through the garden, telling her to leave. Our princess stood frozen, the words hitting her like a physical blow, a pain she felt deep in her soul. His eyes, filled with a chilling hatred, were fixed solely on her, making her feel utterly worthless. The intensity of his rejection was overwhelming, a raw pain she could barely endure. The memory then rewound to a few months prior, showing the beginning of her trauma. She had approached him then too, only to be met with his furious command to leave that instant. He had been looking at something on the ground, before his head snapped up, eyes blazing with an unknown fury. His face was a mask of pure fury, a chilling sight she would never forget, forever burned into her mind. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine, her small body trembling, anticipating the coming storm. Violent, purple energy erupted around him, twisting and cracking the very air, a terrifying display of power. Overwhelmed, she turned to flee, desperate to escape the destructive force he had unleashed. She instinctively reached out, as if to grasp at an explanation for his sudden, inexplicable rage. But the force was too great, and she was thrown back, landing hard on the ground, her body aching. Pain shot through her, and she lay there, stunned and hurt, utterly helpless. He stood over her, his anger undiminished, accusing her with venomous words. His voice was laced with disgust, making it clear she was utterly unwelcome in his presence. Then, he uttered a word that froze her blood, leaving her utterly terrified. This was a dark secret, one that still haunted her. Thalia, the young princess, found herself in a palace still steeped in the fresh grief of its former empress, Bernadette, who had only passed away 6 months prior. Just a month after Bernadette's death, her mother had brought her into the imperial palace, a move that stirred deep resentment. Often, our girl found herself lost in thought, the weight of the past pressing down on her small shoulders. The rain outside the window mirrored the somber mood within the palace walls. Often she sat alone, hugging her knees, feeling the chill of a place that was supposed to be home. The family's history was complicated, a tangled web of relationships that explained the fury of Gareth, the crown prince. His eyes, filled with a raw, painful anger, reflected the shock of a son whose mother had been so quickly replaced. Gareth himself was still reeling, a whirlwind of grief and betrayal consuming his young heart. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and sorrow, a silent accusation against the new empress and her daughter. Thalia understood his anger. It was only natural that he would be furious. A pang of guilt ran through her, a heavy burden for a child who had done nothing but exist. Alone on her grand bed, the immense scale of the palace felt more like an isolating cage than a home. Even simple comforts were denied her. The bathwater was always ice cold, a constant, chilling reminder of her unwelcome presence. Her meals consistently appeared, only to be left to grow cold, a deliberate act of cruelty designed to make her feel unwanted. The palace staff, with their glowing eyes, were the instruments of this quiet torment. Her mother, however, would always reassure her, embracing her warmly and whispering that she was the result of true love. Such reassurances often felt hollow when the reality of her daily life was so different. As she walked through the grand halls, she couldn't escape the hushed whispers of the palace staff. They would lean in close, their faces twisted with disdain as they spoke about her. Cruel words hit her like a physical blow, leaving her flushed and hurt, leaning against a cold pillar. This relentless torment only grew worse over time, a campaign of psychological abuse. The servants would simply walk past, their faces devoid of warmth or recognition, as if she were invisible. Then, one day, something unexpectedly shifted when her nanny presented a meal. Our girl looked up, her blue eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of hope. The food was warm, properly prepared, and plentiful, a stark contrast to her usual cold rations. The dining hall also seemed fuller than usual, with more people gathered around. She ate, a small, grateful smile gracing her lips, savoring the rare warmth. Each bite was a moment of pure, unexpected comfort. It was delicious, and the warmth spread through her, a sensation she hadn't felt in so long. This sudden change in treatment felt strange, almost too good to be true. The servants around her now offered smiles, but there was something unsettling about their expressions. A growing unease began to stir within her as she looked at them. Their smiles were not kind, they were menacing, a chilling prelude to a darker revelation. Their eyes glowed with a sinister light, surrounding her like silent, predatory specters. Alone at the grand table, she was a tiny figure dwarfed by the imposing room, utterly vulnerable. A hand reached down with a spoon, its movements unnervingly slow. Her eye widened, a dawning horror reflected in its blue depths. The spoon held not food, but a grotesque, lifeless rat, dripping with a foul liquid. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor, the horrifying truth crashing down on her. Footsteps echoed as the servants walked away, leaving her in the aftermath of their cruel prank. Looking up from the floor, her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The bowl on the table contained a vile soup, teeming with insects and other repulsive things. Another dish contained wriggling worms, a sickening parody of a meal. She had been fighting just to keep from starving, forced to consume filth in the most glamorous and luxurious place in the world. Later, her kind nanny and her mother appeared. Her elegant mother had come to check on her after the nanny reported a fuss. Thalia, overwhelmed with distress, began to cry uncontrollably. With anguish, she begged her mother, her small voice filled with pain, to make the torment stop. Her mother gently held her, a comforting presence in her moment of despair. She continued to weep, her pleas heartfelt and desperate. Crying out, she pleaded with her mother to prevent anyone from ever hurting her again. Her small face streaked with tears, her blue eyes pleading for protection and an end to her suffering. But her mother, looking down with an unnervingly cold expression, simply asked, "Why should I do that?" Thalia, a 9-year-old princess, faced a world where her perceived weakness made her a constant target. She often found herself overwhelmed, crying to her mother about the small things she couldn't manage on her own. The Empress, however, offered no comfort, instead delivering a stern lecture about her daughter's lack of resolve. Her mother reminded her that as the Emperor's daughter, the palace and its servants were entirely her property, not a burden. That cold truth settled deep in Thalia's young heart, leaving her feeling even more exposed and vulnerable. The weight of her mother's expectations pressed down, a heavy crown she was not yet ready to wear. Her mother's shadowy figure loomed, an intimidating presence whose every word cut deep into Thalia's fragile confidence. Thalia could only whimper, her desperate plea for maternal comfort falling on deaf ears. The Empress's grip on her arm was firm, a physical manifestation of her unyielding will. Thalia instinctively pulled back, a silent protest against her mother's harsh reality. Holding her daughter's trembling hands, the Empress spoke of a different path, one paved with power and control. She introduced Thalia to a boy, a useful guard she had thoroughly tamed, suggesting he would be an asset. A manipulative smile played on the Empress's lips, revealing a cold calculation behind her actions. From her mother's perspective, Thalia was simply too naive and weak to navigate their dangerous world. The Empress explained how some people held her in awe, a testament to her fearsome reputation. Yet, she knew countless others felt disgust and contempt, a constant reminder of the political landscape. Even those who despised her were wary, never seeing her as a target to bully or exploit. This was because the Empress was a truly threatening presence, demanding respect through fear. Her mother's words resonated, creating a chilling understanding within Thalia. She had to remember this lesson: things that were strong and beautiful commanded fear and envy. But things beautiful and weak easily became targets for plunder, especially within the cutthroat imperial palace. Thalia lay in her grand bed, a small figure swallowed by the vastness of her luxurious chamber. The silence of the palace felt heavy, amplifying her isolation and the chilling implications of her mother's advice. She trembled beneath the covers, the fear of being trampled by unseen beasts, a vivid image in her mind. Her small hand clenched into a fist, a quiet resolve beginning to harden within her young spirit. She recalled her mother's words, the painful echo of being called weak and insignificant. The images of her past self flashed before her eyes, her timid gaze, her hesitant gestures. Her soft, mumbling words had always betrayed her fear, giving others an easy target to exploit. She realized that by acting like she deserved whatever was done to her, she had taught them she wouldn't fight back. A new kind of determination sparked in Thalia's eyes as she lay awake, the night filled with her mother's lessons. She looked at her reflection, seeing a gaunt figure, a stark contrast to the pampered princess she was supposed to be. That night, the memory of her mother's cruel comparison, a sewer rat in a stew, burned itself into her mind. The next morning, Thalia descended the grand staircase. Her demeanor subtly changed, a new resolve in her step. Her nanny, surprised by the early rising, quickly approached to offer assistance. "Nanny," Thalia's voice rang out, sharper and more commanding than ever before, echoing through the empty hall. The nanny, accustomed to Thalia's quiet nature, was taken aback by the sudden, forceful tone. Thalia firmly stated that from now on, her nanny would be solely responsible for her grooming. The nanny hesitated, her face a mask of confusion, unsure how to respond to this unexpected shift. She questioned if this was an order from the Empress, trying to grasp the situation. Thalia, without a trace of her former timidity, delivered a swift, stinging slap across the nanny's face. The sound echoed through the room, a clear signal of the new power dynamic that had just been established. "You'll be slapped if you call me my lady from now on," Thalia declared, her blue eyes colder than ice. The nanny's face contorted in shock and fear, understanding the true meaning of the princess's words. Soon after, Thalia walked out, accompanied by the stoic new guard her mother had provided. She glanced at him, a flicker of curiosity in her gaze, wondering if he was truly the useful guard her mother spoke of. His face remained impassive, betraying no emotion, a silent sentinel by her side. In the dining hall, the servants were chatting casually, some even yawning openly, showing a distinct lack of respect. Their relaxed posture and casual chatter indicated their complete disregard for the young princess's presence. A servant approached with her soup, placing it on the table with a familiar clatter. Thalia looked down, her expression changing as she noticed something amiss in her meal. Floating amidst the vegetables and broth was a dead rat, a grotesque insult hidden in plain sight. Her eyes widened in a mixture of horror and cold fury, the ultimate proof of their contempt. Thalia pointed a finger at the offending servant, her voice cutting through the casual atmosphere. The servant, startled, looked up, her face draining of color as she registered the princess's intense gaze. Perhaps in defiance or terror, the servant turned her back, attempting to retreat from the confrontation. In a sudden, violent outburst, Thalia seized a heavy teapot and hurled it, striking the fleeing servant. The teapot connected with a brutal thud, sending the servant sprawling to the floor, blood blooming on her head. Other servants gasped, paralyzed with shock, as the fallen woman lay bleeding, her eyes wide with terror. The new guard stepped forward, his presence a silent promise of swift, unquestioning obedience. Thalia's voice was chillingly calm as she commanded, "Seat this woman next to me immediately." The injured servant's face was a mask of pure terror, her bloodied features reflecting utter despair. She was dragged, whimpering, to the table, her body protesting every inch of the humiliating journey. The guard, without a word, forced the trembling woman into the seat beside Thalia, holding her firm. Thalia looked at her, a predatory glint in her eyes as the servant stared at the gruesome meal. Blood trickled down the woman's face, a stark contrast to the innocent smile now spreading across Thalia's lips. "Eat it," Thalia commanded, indicating the rat-filled soup, her voice devoid of any warmth or mercy. Her innocent smile was terrifying, a clear sign that the weak princess was gone, replaced by a ruthless heir. The servant's terrified gaze fixed on the bowl, knowing what she had to do, her future irrevocably altered. The choice was simple: endure the unthinkable, or face a far worse fate at the hands of her transformed princess. Princess Thalia found herself amidst a horrifying scene, forced to witness the terrified staff around her as a maid was subjected to cruel treatment. An older servant was being held down, made to eat a repulsive meal, while the young princess watched with an unsettling stillness. The chilling command echoed through the room, punctuated by the violent splatters of the forced feeding. Her piercing blue eyes held a cold resolve, contrasting sharply with the maid's raw terror as the ordeal continued. The maid thrashed and screamed, desperate to escape the guard's grip and the unspeakable act she was forced to perform. Held firmly in place, the maid's struggles grew weaker, her body trembling under the unwavering pressure. She was finally forced back into the chair, utterly defeated and broken, her spirit crushed by the torment. The maid's pleas for mercy were desperate, but Thalia remained unmoved, her gaze fixed and unyielding. A glint of metal caught the light as a knife was deliberately picked up, a silent but potent threat. The sharp edge of the cutlery was a stark reminder of the escalating danger, held with an unnerving calm. Her voice cut through the fearful silence, asking if the maid's hand should be placed upon the table, sealing the woman's fate. The implied threat of mutilation hung heavy in the air, a brutal consequence for continued defiance. The maid finally broke, a desperate cry escaping her lips as she promised to consume every last bit of the vile food. Her face contorted in a mask of pure terror and desperation, the maid began to frantically eat, driven by fear. The other servants watched in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of horror and disbelief as the maid choked down the meal. The young princess observed it all with wide, unblinking eyes, showing not a flicker of emotion as the maid suffered. She sat on her grand chair, a small figure of immense power, while the terrified servant stood in the background, utterly subdued. Each of the onlookers felt a cold dread creep into their hearts, realizing the true extent of the young princess's ruthless nature. Their expressions conveyed a chilling realization: the princess they once mocked was now someone to be deeply feared. Her stern, unmoving expression solidified her authority, leaving no doubt about who held the power in that room. Finally, the maid collapsed onto the floor, utterly spent and traumatized, the ordeal having taken its toll. The scene was a grim tableau: the small princess on her throne, the broken maid on the floor, and the silent, terrified servants surrounding them. After that day, the relentless bullying against her stopped as abruptly as if it had never happened. Everyone now treated her with extreme caution, a clear sign of the fear she had instilled in them. Whispers and rumors about her began to spread throughout the palace, painting a dark picture of her character. The court branded her as an offspring of a viper, a cruel judgment that followed her everywhere. A bright, warm voice broke through the tension as her mother, the empress, arrived, greeting her with a smile. The young princess looked up, surprised by her mother's unexpected visit and her seemingly kind demeanor. Her eyes welled with tears, overwhelmed by the rare and sudden attention from her usually distant mother. The empress approached, her smile unwavering, a public display of affection for her daughter. A gentle touch graced her cheek, a moment of physical contact that felt both unfamiliar and intensely significant. Her mother's proud smile was an unsettling sight, hinting at a deeper, more manipulative agenda behind her visit. The empress pulled her into a hug, a gesture that felt more like a performance than genuine warmth. The young princess's face showed surprise as her mother announced a special gift, a reward for her recent actions. The empress gestured towards the entrance, where a figure was just stepping into the grand hall. A close-up revealed the intricate golden details of the newcomer's armor, hinting at his noble status. The new arrival, a knight, stood tall beside the empress, casting a long shadow over the small princess. The knight was a striking figure, with light hair and piercing blue eyes, formally introduced to the court. The knight introduced himself as Varkas Rayadgosiarkan, a name that struck a chord deep within the young princess. Her heart pounded as she recognized him, a boy from her past, her mind reeling with the unexpected reunion. She stared at Varkas, standing beside her mother, the boy who once represented a fleeting hope in her lonely life. Her eye reflected his image, a mirror to a past she thought was long buried, stirring complex emotions within her. The young princess's wide-eyed expression conveyed a mix of shock and a strange, almost painful recognition. A memory flashed before her eyes, Varkas sitting with another girl, a scene from a happier, simpler time. His kind face from that memory was a stark contrast to the formal knight now standing before her. Her feet hesitated, a subtle shift in her posture, as her internal narrative began to take a darker turn. Her gaze hardened, the innocence in her eyes slowly giving way to a colder, more calculating resolve. Another memory surfaced, one of him holding her, offering comfort in a moment of despair. His expression in that memory was tinged with sorrow, a silent acknowledgement of her suffering. Then, the memory of being pushed away, of his failure to protect her, flashed with painful clarity. Back in the present, her mother and Varkas stood in the opulent hall, the image of a perfect yet hollow family. Her face was now resolute, her eyes narrowed, her past feelings for Varkas replaced by a steely determination. Varkas stood solemn and formal, completely unaware of the profound shift happening within the young princess. He knelt before the empress, an act of loyalty and submission, but not to the one who truly commanded his future. The young princess looked down at Varkas, her expression unreadable, heavy with the weight of her past and her burgeoning power. He knelt before her, formal and obedient, confirming his new role as her personal knight. Varkas knelt, his head bowed, while the young princess gazed down upon him, knowing this was not the hope she once dreamt of, but rather the beginning of her deepest agony. In a world of forgotten fields, a young princess faced a marriage that was less about love and more about power. The Rome Empire hummed with activity, yet within the palace walls, a quiet tension lingered. Her eyes scanned the bustling courtyard, searching for a familiar figure amidst the preparations for their journey. Over in the stables, Varkas, her fiancé, tended to his horse with a quiet dignity, seemingly unaware of her gaze. Even in this simple act, his presence was calm, a stark contrast to her own racing thoughts and anxieties. Her attendants nudged her, wondering why she hesitated, while her own heart pounded with anticipation at the thought of approaching him. A faint blush touched her cheeks, a rare moment of vulnerability that spoke volumes about her unspoken feelings. He looked far more human now than when she first met him as a child, stepping into the imperial palace. Raised under cruel training by priests, he was molded into a loyal servant, stripped of his emotions and true self. Her own mother had discovered his plight and tried to protect him, seeing the emptiness in his young eyes. But it was already too late. He had lost not only joy and sorrow, but even the most basic human desires, becoming a shell. He had become a puppet, moving only by following orders, without a flicker of personal will or independent thought. Stripped of all desires, he was left so hollow that even basic instincts like eating and sleeping had abandoned him entirely. Soon, our boy would leave the Imperial Guard to begin his succession process, becoming Grand Duke. He was always polite, sometimes even affectionate, yet a part of her couldn't quite believe the reality of their impending union. Why did it still feel so unreal that he was to be her husband, her partner for life, despite all the preparations? She remembered the gentle boy who had stayed by her ailing mother's side, a quiet pillar of support in their darkest times. He still carried that same quiet demeanor, a ghost of the child he once was, burdened by a past he couldn't escape. Their marriage was an arrangement, a political alliance meant to strengthen their house and secure their future. But she would be his wife, and one day she would bear his heir, fulfilling her duty with unwavering determination. She held on to the hope that if she poured enough affection into him, over enough time, his heart might finally respond. Surely, even his frozen heart would thaw someday, revealing the warmth she so desperately sought beneath his stoic facade. He noticed her then, asking if something was the matter, his voice a gentle inquiry that broke her reverie. She quickly offered an excuse, claiming curiosity about the travel preparations, trying to mask her true feelings. The preparations were almost finished, he confirmed, everything nearly in place for their journey. He noted the longer than expected preparations and the rising heat, predicting a grueling journey ahead. It couldn't be helped, she acknowledged, all because of her brother, Gareth's, excessive demands. Her brother had made extravagant demands, 20 more servants, a jester, a personal chef, even a tailor for the trip. She apologized for the trouble, feeling a burden of responsibility for her brother's whims. He reassured her, saying she had nothing to apologize for, as these were necessary arrangements regardless. He even commented that her brother was behaving rather decently, a surprising assessment given the circumstances. She rationalized his grumpiness, knowing he was sending off his beloved sister, a moment that would understandably cause some distress. But as she prepared to leave, a deeper worry gnawed at her, overshadowing the immediate concerns of travel. Could her brother truly stand against that cunning woman, Senevere, all by himself once she was gone? She voiced the request, hoping to visit the imperial palace even after marriage, a way to keep an eye on things and protect her family. She chided herself, thinking it an immature request, knowing the immense duties awaiting her as Lady of House Siarkan. He granted her wish with a gentle smile, assuring her she was welcome to come and go as she pleased, easing her mind. She realized the generosity of his offer, remembering the true political purpose of their union, which made his kindness all the more touching. She thanked him, truly grateful for his understanding and the unexpected warmth of his response. He then asked if she could spare a moment, despite her busy schedule, indicating something personal. He had something he wanted to give her before they set off on their journey, a small gesture that held significance. In the quiet garden, he presented her with a handmade handkerchief, carefully embroidered with the crest of House Siarkan. It was a tradition, he explained, for a betrothed to receive such a gift before a journey, a symbol of their bond. Even though they were traveling together, he noted, the gesture still held deep meaning for him. He accepted it with a solemn nod, recognizing it as an honorable gift, a promise whispered without words. He promised to cherish it dearly, his words a comfort to her anxious heart, solidifying their connection. Their tender moment was abruptly broken by a messenger's urgent shout, shattering the peaceful atmosphere. His Majesty had summoned Varkas, the messenger gasped, breathless from his haste, signaling trouble. His presence was requested immediately, leaving no room for delay, and a sense of dread began to creep in. It had to be the cunning woman, she thought, her mind racing, wondering what new scheme she was plotting. The journey had council approval, and their marriage was something the conservative nobles had long desired, making any interference suspicious. Whatever wicked scheme the woman was brewing, she told herself, she couldn't undo what was already set in motion. But Zenevie had a history of manipulation, once keeping her fiancé tethered to Thalia for 7 years against his family's wishes. Now, the imperial concubine was likely sweet-talking the emperor again, trying to bend his will to her own nefarious purposes. She declared her intention to go with him, unwilling to let him face the concubine alone, a fierce protectorate rising within her. The grand hall of the imperial palace awaited them, echoing with unspoken tensions and the weight of political intrigue. She recalled a fable about two brothers, once deeply caring, living in a quiet village, their bond unbreakable. But a devil, hating all good things, dropped a massive nugget of gold before them, intent on tearing their bond apart. Blinded by its gleam, the brothers fought, hurting each other in their greed, their love forgotten. The princess saw Zenevie as the golden devil, blinding the emperor, once an honorable king, with her allure. This devil had drowned her mother's entire life in sorrow, leaving a trail of pain and regret in her wake, and had condemned her and her brother to a life filled with grief and humiliation, a constant shadow. The golden devil had even birthed Arthros, the emperor's son, a new threat that now loomed over her brother's very position. Her brother and Thalia were mere pawns in Zenevie's greater game. The true threat was Arthros, growing in influence and power. The emperor's words echoed, reminding her how many hopes were now placed on the child, a dangerous shift in power she could not ignore. The world of the Forgotten Field introduced a princess whose fate was tied to a web of imperial schemes, often at her own expense. Inside the opulent court, the emperor and empress discussed Thalia's impending marriage, a union arranged with surprising speed and little consultation. Despite her royal blood, our princess's status as a bastard meant her every move was scrutinized, making any secret marriage an impossibility. Yet, the timing of this arranged marriage felt suspiciously convenient, almost as if it were orchestrated for a specific, unspoken purpose. Empress Zenevie confirmed the proposal had arrived just recently, her smile betraying a satisfaction that went beyond simple joy. She spoke of back-to-back joyous occasions for the imperial family, hinting at the grand political implications of this conveniently timed match. A courtier, feigning ignorance, inquired about the identity of the fortunate groom, drawing out the Empress's reveal. Senevier's smile widened as she finally revealed the name, Berdain Syrian, the distinguished head of the Count Syrian family. Varkas, standing nearby, listened with a growing sense of unease, his gaze fixed on the Empress's calculating expression. This name he knew well, and the unsettling implications such a match held for our princess, a pawn in a dangerous game. The Empress continued, noting that Thalia was long past her coming-of-age ceremony, making this marriage a perfectly timely affair. Claiming it was a decent match, her statement struck Varkas as deeply unsettling, knowing Syrian's history. This was no ordinary suitor. Count Syrian was infamous, a former follower and lover of Lady Terran, Thalia's own deceased mother. For the longest time, he had held the record among Lady Terran's paramours, a fact that twisted the knife of this arranged marriage even deeper. The thought of a mother marrying her daughter to an old lover was scandalous, a blatant disregard for decency that shocked him. Varkas wondered if the Empress had lost her mind, or if a deeper, more sinister plot was at play, using our princess as bait. He remembered Syrian as Lady Terran's escort at a grand banquet, a detail that now felt like a cruel, twisted foreshadowing. Unconcerned with the underlying currents, the Emperor simply ordered preparations for Thalia's journey to begin immediately. Varkas accepted the command, his face grim, understanding the true heavy weight of this impending departure for our princess. Later, as they walked through the castle corridors, Varkas asked if she truly intended to go along with this marriage. Cold stone walls seemed to absorb his unspoken fears, offering no comfort to his troubled mind. He suspected Empress Senevia was plotting something wicked, using the marriage as a mere plausible excuse for her true intentions. Our princess agreed, her expression confirming she also understood the political chess game at play, her life a piece on the board. She asked if that was all, hinting at the deeper, more dangerous implications that lay beneath the surface of this arrangement. Even without knowing the Empress's full plan, blindly taking our princess away felt reckless and fraught with unknown peril. Varkas, his resolve hardening, wondered what else he could possibly do, bound as he was by duty and circumstance. Turning to our princess, his eyes filled with a grim determination, he was ready to face the impossible for her sake. He reminded her of his sworn loyalty to the Emperor, a duty that bound him even when his heart wished for another path. From the very beginning, he had no path other than obedience, a painful truth for both of them to bear. Thalia, her eyes wide with shock and a hint of despair, could only murmur a soft, inaudible response to his words. Varkas looked at her, his expression softening slightly, understanding the silent plea in her gaze, the fear she couldn't voice. He then voiced the harsh reality of their world, where royalty consistently demanded unwavering loyalty from the nobles, regardless of personal cost. His gaze hardened once more, reflecting the heavy burden of his position and the difficult choices he was constantly forced to make. A hand reached out, a desperate, unspoken plea for comfort and protection in a world that offered her little of either. It hung in the air, a silent testament to her helplessness and the vast chasm between her desires and her reality. Varkas enveloped her in a tight embrace, a gesture meant to convey reassurance, even if it couldn't erase her fears. He promised her that she would never come to any harm, his voice firm with conviction, trying to instill a sense of security. Gently, he stroked her hair, a silent vow to protect her, a guardian against the schemes that threatened her life. He had sworn to the former Empress, Lady Terran, that he would protect both Thalia and her twin with all his might. Our princess felt a pang of resentment, realizing how easily he could calm her, yet how profoundly insincere his comfort felt. Her pride, her face, her authority as a princess, all felt utterly meaningless in that moment, stripped away by circumstance. Despite their decade-long connection, it was an embrace that never truly warmed, a hollow comfort that left her cold. Yet, a part of her acknowledged that as long as he was on her side, there truly was nothing to worry about. Nothing at all, a quiet thought that offered a fragile, almost desperate sense of security in her tumultuous life. Varkas looked out into the distance, his eyes empty and distant, always wandering to some far-off place beyond her reach. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Empress Senevia held a small vial, a potent poison she had intended to use on Isla. She had lost her secret weapon, a setback in her intricate schemes, a piece missing from her cruel puzzle. Her musings suggested her esteemed brother had likely healed his trivial wounds with the help of priests, rendering her poison useless. A single drop of blood fell from her finger, a stark contrast to her cold calculations, a tiny wound mirroring her frustration. Thoughts drifted to Varkas, and the eyes that looked at him, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite grasp or control. A sudden internal heat consumed her, a flicker of raw, uncontrolled emotion that betrayed her usual composure. She wondered if she should get up, unable to see Varkas, lost in her own dark thoughts and unresolved desires. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie, pulling her back to the present with an abrupt jolt. With a composed voice, she bid the visitor enter, her face quickly regaining its usual impassive mask. Her younger brother, Arthros, a bright-eyed boy with a curious spirit, stepped into the room, a stark contrast to her dark mood. He had clearly snuck out of the castle just to see her, a gesture that surprised our princess with its unexpected innocence. Dahlia observed him, noting the stark contrast between their lives, despite sharing the same parents and bloodline. She, the seed of a filthy affair, was burdened by her illegitimate birth, forever marked by scandal. He, however, was the legitimate heir, born of the officially married emperor and empress, a symbol of purity and power. This was the first time she had based him so closely since his baptism, a distant memory from her isolated childhood. Her mother had always kept them apart, fearing what she might do to the legitimate heir, Arthros. Asking if he had come all this way by himself, her tone was laced with a hint of concern for his safety. Arthros assured her he hadn't come alone, explaining that his guard, Barons, was with him, waiting nearby. Then he revealed the news. She was going on a long journey soon, a pilgrimage according to their mother. Our princess's eyes widened in disbelief. She had heard nothing of this, making her feel even more like a pawn. Arthros explained that their mother had said she would also be going on the pilgrimage this time, a forced departure. Stunned, Dahlia repeated his words, the realization of this long journey crashing down with its full, heavy implications. Arthros, with a childlike innocence, shared more of what their mother had said, unaware of the pain he was causing. He revealed that she might be getting married soon, a piece of news that hit her like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears. A man named Count Sarian had submitted a proposal, the very man Varkas had spoken of, an old lover of her own mother. Our princess's blue eyes, usually calm and composed, now held a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, and deep sorrow. A cold dread spread through her, realizing the full extent of her mother's manipulations and her own powerlessness. The realization crashed down on her. She was being used, just another pawn in her mother's grand design, her life not her own. This was only the beginning. The real storm hadn't hit yet, and our princess was about to be swept into its merciless currents. Princess Dahlia found herself in a familiar state of despair, her world feeling as though it was unraveling around her. She had just learned from Arthros, a man who harbored an interest in her, that her mother had arranged her marriage. The news struck her with a profound sense of humiliation. He hadn't even bothered to acknowledge her presence, let alone inform her directly of such a life-altering decision. Meanwhile, her mother, Genevieve, observed the scene, a subtle, knowing smile playing on her lips as she adjusted her spectacles. Dahlia's anger flared, a silent scream of frustration echoing within her as she realized, once again, she was completely disregarded. Her feelings, her future, none of it seemed to matter. The indignity of the situation burned, leaving Thalia's face contorted in a silent protest against the dismissive treatment she endured. Her mother, ever the picture of calm and calculated grace, slowly removed her glasses, her gaze unwavering as she watched Thalia's reaction. Genevieve sat, her posture regal and composed, her eyes fixed on Dahlia as if evaluating a chess piece, not her own daughter. Dahlia could only stare back, her mind racing with questions, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach as she awaited her mother's next move. A knot of anxiety tightened in Dahlia's chest, the weight of her mother's silent judgment pressing down on her. Her mother merely offered a serene, almost pitying smile, a gesture that only intensified Dahlia's internal turmoil. The revelation that her intended groom was Syrian, a man she utterly despised, sent a jolt of pure horror through Thalia. She couldn't believe her mother would propose such a match, a decision so clearly designed to cause her misery. Thalia's eyes blazed with defiance, a silent vow that she would never submit to such a fate. A terrifying vision flashed through Thalia's mind, a nightmare scene of being held captive, overwhelmed by forces beyond her control. Her voice, when it came, was laced with desperation, a plea against the life being forced upon her. She wanted no part of marriage. Thalia turned her back on her mother, the unspoken chasm between them wider than ever, a barrier of years of neglect and manipulation. Her mother's profile remained impassive, betraying no hint of emotion, only a calculated stillness. A single tear welled in Thalia's eye, reflecting the deep-seated pain and betrayal she felt, a raw vulnerability exposed in the harsh light of her mother's indifference. She stood amidst a dark, suffocating floral pattern, feeling trapped and utterly alone, as if the very air around her was pressing in. Thalia felt small, insignificant, overshadowed by the looming presence of her mother's manipulative will. The crushing realization hit Thalia like a physical blow. Her mother had known everything, every secret, every hope, and had used it all against her. Her mother began to walk away, leaving Thalia to grapple with the bitter taste of her words. Genevieve offered a soft, almost angelic smile, a facade that only served to highlight the cruelty of her intentions. Her mother reached out, her hand gently caressing Thalia's cheek, a touch that felt more like a brand than an endearment. A chilling smile parted her mother's lips, a silent promise of further schemes and heartless decisions. The image of Syrian, smug and insidious, materialized in Thalia's mind, a stark reminder of the loathsome future her mother had planned for her. Her mother's gaze, sharp and piercing, seemed to strip Thalia bare, leaving her with no defenses. Thalia covered her face, overwhelmed by the weight of her mother's pronouncements, the choices laid before her feeling like a death sentence. She felt herself plummeting through a dark, star-dusted void, a symbolic fall into the abyss of her despair, her future uncertain and terrifying. Days later, Thalia, dressed for travel, stood beside Edric Rubon, a knight of the Imperial Guard, who eyed her mountain of luggage with clear disapproval. Her annoyance was palpable. She scoffed at his inexperience, assuming he understood nothing about her status or needs. Edric's brow furrowed in confusion, clearly taken aback by her condescending tone and the sheer volume of her belongings. Thalia's mind, however, was already racing, contemplating grander schemes to outshine the first princess, Ayla, even considering stealing the Empress's jewels. Her mother's earlier pretense of providing attendance, only to have Gareth reject them, was a clear sign of the limited support Thalia truly had. The loyal ones, her mother's fanatics, were always just out of reach. Stepping out of her carriage, Thalia presented a regal image, ready to embark on this unwelcome pilgrimage. Her gaze hardened, a determined glint in her blue eyes, a silent resolve to face whatever came next on her own terms. Edric, a man named Varkas, stood before her, his expression unyielding, his presence a stark contrast to her internal turmoil. Luggage lay scattered and piled high, a chaotic testament to Thalia's desperate attempt to assert her status and comfort. Varkas watched the scene unfold, his gaze cold and assessing, a silent judgment hanging in the air. Thalia met his stare with defiance, her expression unyielding, ready for the confrontation she knew was coming. She stood amidst the chaos of her belongings, confronting Varkas and his guards, a tense standoff brewing. Her resolve was firm, her eyes fixed on Varkas, daring him to challenge her authority. Varkas approached the carriage, calmly explaining that the procession would pass through several major cities, making most of her luggage unnecessary. His skepticism was clear. He questioned her sudden concern for propriety, knowing her usual disregard for reputation. Thalia merely turned away, refusing to engage with his logic, her pride too wounded to concede. In a flash of uncontrolled fury, Thalia swung her hand, striking Varkas's arm. The sound of the slap echoed sharply, a desperate act of rebellion against his encroaching authority. Varkas's hand shot out, seizing her arm with an unyielding grip, his control absolute. The struggle was brief but intense, Thalia's anger flaring as she tried to pull away from his grasp. Her voice rose in a furious protest, demanding to know who dared give him the right to defy her. Varkas held her hands firmly, his grip unbreakable, as Thalia continued to pull and twist, her frustration mounting. His grip tightened around her wrists, a clear display of his unwavering authority. He gave her a slight push, asserting his dominance and reminding her of her subordinate position. Thalia lashed out, screaming at him, reminding him he was just a knight, not the Grand Duke, and how dare he treat a princess this way. Ignoring her furious protests, Barkas calmly gave orders to his men, commanding them to unload the luggage without delay. A tear traced the path down Thalia's cheek, her face a mask of shock and despair as she watched her belongings being taken. She lunged forward, a desperate attempt to stop the guards from carrying away her precious possessions. Barkas scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her away from the scene, her eyes still fixed on her rapidly disappearing luggage. He held her firmly as she struggled, her face a mixture of confusion and utter helplessness, the world spinning around her. Thalia's eyes, wide with disbelief and brimming with tears, reflected the sudden, brutal reality of her complete powerlessness. What happened next changed everything, and nobody saw it coming. The second princess found herself sprawled on the couch, roughly tossed there by her former personal guard, Varkas, who had just resigned. She struggled to sit upright, her face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. He stood over her, his expression cold and unyielding, holding her in place with a firm hand. Our princess, feeling cornered, lashed out, her eyes burning with indignation. She demanded recognition for her royal status, arguing that if he truly respected her, he would never have treated her with such disregard. Varkas, however, remained resolute, his gaze unwavering as he met her angry stare. She could hardly believe the audacity of his actions, a deep shock settling in her chest. With deliberate slowness, he reached for his chainmail, his movements punctuated by the metallic scrape. He explained that he would consider his prior actions as the price for touching her without permission. But he made it clear he would not tolerate any more of her childish behavior, his voice firm and final. His words were a stark reminder that he was no longer bound by his duty as her personal guard. With the final, crushing statement, he stepped away, leaving her alone in the carriage as the heavy door slammed shut. Alone, the princess sat on the couch, lost in thought, the sound of the door echoing in the silence. She chewed on her lip, her eyes filled with a deep sadness that reflected her isolation. Memories of a younger Varkas, always by her side, flashed through her mind, a stark contrast to her present loneliness. His image lingered, a reminder of the bond they once shared, now irrevocably broken. Her fingers traced her lips, a gesture of quiet contemplation as she remembered their past. In the past, she would have stormed out immediately after such a confrontation, knowing he would have followed. But now, he was gone, and the silence was deafening as the carriage began to move. She gazed out the window, her expression distant, as the gentle rumble slowly picked up speed. As the journey progressed, it felt less like a royal procession and more like a descent into a nightmare. She wondered how peaceful it would be if this journey simply led her straight to hell, a desperate thought born of her profound despair. The world outside the carriage was bustling, but she wished for it all to end, for everyone to march into their graves together. This grand imperial pilgrimage was meant to retrace the steps of Darien Rome Goethe, the first emperor who had united 10 kingdoms. Darien, a royal from Keen, had fled the Bolto kingdom's invasion and migrated to the central region where he built his legacy. He later unified the Osiriya tribes, gathering supporters from various countries to unite the 10 territories, laying the foundation for the Rome Empire. This massive procession, marking the end of a 20-year war, was a sacred ritual to honor his achievements and showcase the imperial family's dignity. The crowds cheered, celebrating the imperial family, their enthusiasm a vibrant spectacle of loyalty. The air vibrated with excitement as the procession moved forward, a living testament to the empire's power. The crown prince, handsome and regal in his armor, rode at the head of the procession, waving to his adoring public. He was met with roars of approval and blessings, the people captivated by his charismatic presence. His green eyes gleamed with confidence, reflecting the joyous confetti showering down. Then came Ayla, the first princess, equally stunning, receiving a thunderous welcome from the people. They called her beautiful, showering her with blessings, their admiration for her clear and unreserved. But when the carriage carrying our princess passed, the mood shifted, whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. A young guard riding alongside her carriage couldn't help but overhear the cruel remarks. He thought that if she just showed her face, maybe the public's opinion would change, but she remained hidden. The carriage continued, a stark symbol of her isolation, as the whispers grew louder. The guard's expression darkened, burdened by the weight of the negative gossip surrounding her. The glowing eyes of the crowd seemed to bore into the carriage, fueling the rumors of her awful temper. He wondered how many personal guards had quit because of her behavior over the years. Circearchen, her former guard, must have been a saint to have stayed by her side for 7 years, a thought that weighed on the young guard. He thought about how horribly she must have acted to drive a man so devoted to the imperial family to such lengths. Later, at the campsite, the young guard was told to get ready soon, a new task awaiting him. He was surprised, as they were about to have dinner and set up camp, the day seemingly winding down. But then she appeared, our princess, emerging from her tent in a dazzling deep purple gown. The young guard's jaw dropped, caught off guard by her sudden, breathtaking transformation. Her golden hair flowed around her like a halo in the evening light, making her look utterly ethereal against the bonfire. The guard's eyes widened, reflecting the sparkling jewels on her dress and the unexpected beauty of the moment. She looked breathtaking, exuding an undeniable aura of regal confidence, her gaze resolute. Other guards were equally stunned, their faces betraying their complete bewilderment. Our princess looked at the young guard, her eyes piercing, holding his gaze firmly. She declared that she didn't like this place, her voice carrying an unexpected authority. The young guard was taken aback by her sudden statement, unsure how to respond. She then commanded them to move the entire campsite, her decision absolute and immediate. He could only stammer in disbelief, completely at a loss for words, the absurdity of the request hanging in the air. Her demand hung heavy, leaving everyone present in stunned silence, wondering what impossible order would come next. The princess stood face to face with the commander at the edge of the camp, a lantern burning low between them. She had come with a demand, and the weight of it pressed the air flat. This was not a casual request, it was the opening move of a power struggle neither of them could afford to lose. She cut him off before he could even form a word. Nobody had asked for his view, and she made sure he felt that. Her eyes were sharp enough to draw blood, 2 points of cold blue fury locked onto him with the full force of a woman who had never been told no and refused to start now. Yet beneath that fury was something else, a trace of a smirk, a dare. She was testing him, and she knew it, and she wanted him to know it too. The tension between them was not the kind that breaks easily. It was the kind that bends things slowly out of shape. A beat of quiet. She held her ground, letting the silence do what her words had started. One eye barely open, the other watching him from the side. Not rage anymore, just cold, patient calculation. She was already deciding her next move before he had made his first. He turned and walked away, not a retreat, a dismissal. His cloak swept behind him as the gap between them widened, and the aide standing nearby looked like he wished he were anywhere else. She stood frozen, fists tight, the shock of being ignored written plainly across her face. The aide offered what he could. A soft, almost apologetic half-smile. He had clearly seen this dynamic before. Behind him, the campfires burned on, indifferent. He was caught between 2 people, neither of whom would back down, and that was a very bad place to be. From high above, they looked small. 2 figures dwarfed by the forest and the dying light. She told him everything about the camp bothered her. The bugs, the water, the noise from the trees. It sounded like complaint. It was really a mask over a far deeper fear she was not yet ready to name. He explained the logic, griffons, harpies, the forest as a wall against large beasts. She was not moved. The bugs had already bitten her twice, the leaves would not stop their noise, and the birds were shrieking through the night. She had not slept. That made her more dangerous, not less. She flicked something at him, a bug, or her frustration, or both, and he flinched without meaning to. She barely registered it, already half asleep on her feet from the sleepless night, complaining even as her body gave out. He looked rattled in a way he would not admit to himself. The bite on his ear drew blood, thin, dark, real. His face went pale and dazed, not from pain but from the absurdity of it. He was the commander of an imperial escort, and a forest bug had gotten him before any enemy had. The humiliation was quiet but complete. He grabbed her before she could storm off, hand at her arm, not rough but firm, the move of a man who had run out of patience. The maids nearby went still. This was the first time he had used his hands to make a point instead of his silence, and everyone felt the shift. She looked away, not in defeat, in decision. The way her eyes dropped told you she was not giving up, she was changing tactics. Something in her had gone quiet in a way that was harder to read than her anger. Quiet from her was more worrying than fury. He pulled her close, an abrupt, almost rough motion, autumn leaves scattering behind them. It was not tender, It was the gesture of someone who had decided that reason was done, that this moment needed a different kind of language. The world around them blurred into gold and rust. He looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. Not cold, not warm, something between the two that had no clean name. His mouth was just barely open, like the words were forming and then thought better of themselves. He was calculating, but for once the math was personal. They stood together in the open camp, closer than rank allowed, the firelight painting everything amber behind them. Soldiers moved in the distance, pretending not to notice. The space between the two of them had shrunk to nothing, and nobody had quite explained how that happened. She met his move with fire of her own, chin up, teeth bared, every inch of her daring him to keep going. This was not fear. This was a princess who had been pushed into a corner and had decided the corner was now her throne. She would not flinch first. His hand closed over hers, or hers over his. The motion quick, taut, charged. A single touch that said more than the argument had. Whatever had just passed between them was not something either one had planned, and that made it matter more, not less. She walked away and he stood watching her go. Neither of them spoke. The gap between them grew with each step she took, and the camp sounds rushed back in to fill the silence they had made. He stayed rooted to the spot a moment longer than he needed to. And there it was. The sad, sharp truth behind all of this. He had no real backing of his own. Any authority he had could be swept away by the right word from the right family. The aide chewed on a scroll and looked genuinely sorry, which made it worse. She moved through the camp like a woman who owned it, or wished she did. Her maids trailed at a careful distance, reading her mood from the set of her shoulders. The fires were burning low. The night was coming in fast, and with it, all the things that daylight kept at bay. The maids exchanged a look, the kind that needed no words. They had served long enough to know when something had shifted in the air. Whatever had passed between their mistress and the commander had left a mark on the camp, and everyone was quietly deciding what to do with it. The aide looked tired in the bone-deep way of men who spend their days between two stubborn people. He said nothing to the maid beside him. There was nothing useful to say. Some situations just had to burn themselves out, and his job was to be there when the smoke cleared. Her heart was louder than the camp. She could feel it, that traitorous thump, and she hated it. She needed to put real space between herself and him, not out of spite, out of survival. The closer she stayed, the harder it became to think clearly, and she needed to think clearly more than she needed anything else. She came to his tent alone under a red and purple sky. A black horse grazed outside, indifferent to court rank or personal drama. She had made up her mind. Whatever the cost of asking again, she was going to pay it. She was not a woman who gave up on a plan. Inside the tent, she made her case again. One hand out, voice even, trying for reason where fury had already failed. The candle on the chest burned small and steady. She had chosen calm this time as her weapon, and she was wielding it with care, if not much hope. A hand grabbed the curtain and yanked it aside. Sharp, fast, no ceremony. This was not an invitation. It was the kind of motion that meant someone had just run out of patience and was about to make that very clear in terms that could not be misread. He was in the middle of cleaning up, still bare from the wash, and he did not look pleased to have company. She held her ground anyway. The fact that he was half-dressed did not seem to register as anything she should retreat from. She had a point to make, and she was making it. He dried off slowly, unhurried, as if she were not there, or as if her being there was something he could simply wait out. His face was unreadable, one eye catching the light. He was not going to give her the reaction she came looking for. That was its own kind of answer. Water dripped from him in the quiet of the tent, slow, patient drops that made time feel heavy. Everything was paused. Even the argument seemed to hold its breath. The tension was not the loud kind anymore. It had gone still and deep, the way water gets before it freezes. They faced each other from across the tent. Him shirtless and unimpressed, her dressed for a court that was miles away. The bucket on the floor, the curtain behind him. Everything around them was camp rough and practical, and she stood in it like something that did not quite belong but refused to leave. Color rose in her face before she could stop it. Not anger, something warmer and far less welcome. She bit her teeth together and looked somewhere past his shoulder, willing her own face to behave. It did not behave. It almost never did when she needed it to most. He leaned over her, one arm braced against the pole, and looked down at her without moving. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The closeness itself was the argument, a reminder that he took up space she could not simply order him out of. She stepped in, close, deliberate, making him the one who had to decide what to do with the distance she had just erased. Her smile was the sharp kind that meant she knew exactly what she was doing. He did not step back, neither did she. The next move belonged to whoever blinked. She helped them dress. Or he let her, which was the more remarkable thing. In the purple quiet of the tent, they stood together without fighting, without commands, without titles between them. It was brief and strange and somehow more honest than anything they had said to each other all day. He pushed the tent flap aside and walked out without a word, and she followed to the open doorway. The night air came in cold and full of stars. She watched him go with the look of someone who had not gotten what they came for and was not sure what they had gotten instead. She threw the threat at his back. Something about flogging, about rank, about what happened to those who did not obey. He kept walking. The threat landed in empty air and slid off him like rain off stone. She already knew it would. That was what made it so maddening. He stepped out into the night and she was left in the tent's warm glow, watching his back disappear. The lamp on the box threw a small circle of light around her. Outside was dark and vast and full of the forest noise she hated. She had lost this round and they both knew it. She let herself pause. Really pause. For the first time in the whole exchange. Her face was softer here, less weapon and more person. Whatever armor she wore in front of him had slipped just slightly, and what was under it was curious, and a little bit lost, and not unkind. He came out of the dark like a verdict, larger than the scene behind him, moving with the ease of someone who had already decided and was simply walking toward what he'd decided. She scrambled to catch up. The aide behind her had gone carefully still, watching from the edge of things. He bowed his head, just slightly, not submission, more like a man bracing. Something in the line of his neck said he was done talking and had moved into a different register entirely. Whatever came next was going to be harder and quieter than argument. Her face broke. Just a crack, just at the edge of the eye. She was not crying, not yet, but something in her was very close to it. This was the part of her she kept behind the fury and the demands. It was real in a way her anger sometimes wasn't, and it was painful to watch. Her hand shot out and grabbed his cloak, fast, hard, the grip of someone who had decided that words were done and touch was what was left. Light burst out from behind the cloth. It was not a soft moment. It was urgent, almost desperate, a last bid for something she couldn't name cleanly. And he stopped. He did not pull away. She had his cloak and he stood there under the stars with her hand holding him in place, and the camp went quiet around them as if even the fire knew to give this moment room. He looked down at her and asked how long she had been holding back. She gave him the full force of it, blazing, reckless, a month's worth of being ignored, compressed into one expression. This was not a tantrum. This was the genuine wound. She had been dismissed so many times that being heard felt like a foreign language she had stopped believing anyone would speak. He looked at her hand on his collar and said that pretending to listen required something worth listening to. It was cruel, the way only the truth can be cruel. Precise, flat, impossible to argue with. She had probably heard something like it before. That was what made it land so hard. The camp spread behind them, half the world watching and half pretending not to. Two knights stood at the edges of the frame, facing away with suspicious care. She stared forward, the fury gone for a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like the first crack of understanding. She said it quietly, to the dark and to herself as much as to him. She had been wrong. 3 words that cost a person like her more than most people spend in a year. Her chin was still up, her jaw was still set, but the words were real, and she had said them. From a distance, under a sky bleeding orange and deep blue, they stood together in a way the camp could see. Not close in the way of people who like each other, close in the way of people who have stopped pretending they are not bound by something they did not choose. From behind his shoulder, through the gap in his cloak, a knight and a maid looked on with wide eyes and the very particular expression of people who had just seen something they were going to be talking about for a long time. The stars above them were vast and uninterested in any of it. The camp at night. Banners still, the black horse grazing at the post, the tent sealed against the dark. The argument had moved inside somewhere, or had gone quiet, or had become something else. The world outside held its breath the way it does when something irrevocable has just happened and no one has said so yet. They stood close now in the open camp, surrounded by boots and barrels and soldiers keeping their eyes elsewhere. He leaned toward her ear. She held very still. Whatever he said was only for her, and that mattered, that even here, surrounded by people, he had found a way to make it private. Under the full weight of the night sky, the gap between them finally closed to nothing. He looked down. She looked up. The stars stretched wide above them like they had nothing better to do than witness. Neither of them was pretending anymore, and that was the most dangerous thing that had happened all chapter. One eye, wide open, stripped of every defense. No fury, no strategy, no rank. Just the raw fact of being seen at close range by someone who refused to look away. It was the most bare she had been in the whole chapter, and she had not planned for it to happen like this. From above, they were two small figures standing very close in the dust of the camp. The world around them was large and indifferent, but they were not large and indifferent to each other, and that was a problem they were going to have to live with for the rest of this journey. He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel him there without turning. His face was still, looking at something past her, or not looking at anything, just being present in the way of a person who has stopped fighting a moment and is simply inside it. She had gone still too. He breathed out, slow, measured, the exhale of a man choosing his next words with the care of a soldier picking ground. His face was not hard, but it was not soft either. It was the face of someone deciding how much of himself to risk on what he was about to say. He laid it out clean. He had no plan to chase her whims. She should rest. He owed her no reasons for his choices. She pushed back. Just her camp, not the whole thing. Why refuse? He held firm. She played her last card. She was the emperor's daughter, and he had to obey. The sky above them was full of stars that did not care who won. A single boot, pressing down into the grass. Slow, certain, unhurried. It was the sound and weight of a decision being made. Something was about to happen that could not be walked back, and the ground itself seemed to register the moment before any of the people did. The boot settled fully into the earth. He had made his choice and was now standing in it. There was nothing theatrical about the move. That was what made it heavy. He was not performing resolve. He simply had it, the way the ground has weight, without needing to announce itself. Face to face under the full open sky, both of them finally still. The argument was over, not because one side had won, but because they had both run out of armor and found themselves standing in the same exposed place. A guard watched from the far edge. The sky above them was something else entirely. He leaned in close enough that she could see his eyes in full, not cold, not kind, just very present and very sure. This was the moment the whole chapter had been building toward. Two people who had spent all day refusing to see each other, now unable to look away. She looked up at him with something she had not shown him all day, a kind of open, startled honesty, no strategy behind it. She had not expected to end up here. She had not expected him. Her eyes said all of that without any of the words she would have chosen if she'd had warning. He turned away from her and walked. The knights stood at the edges, the firelight warm behind them, and the two of them existed in the center of all of it like the eye of something that had not finished turning yet. She did not follow. She let him go. That was its own kind of choice. She watched him leave and the mask came back, not the angry one, a quieter one, eyes level, jaw set, not grieving and not glad, just watching. She was a person who had learned early that showing too much was the same as losing. She had held most of herself back today. Mostly. He walked into the mist alone, soft lights drifting around him like the world was unsure what to do with him now that the fight was over. His back told you nothing about what was happening in his chest. He was the kind of man who kept those two things very far apart, and the distance was costing him. She stood in the glow of the camp as an armored figure moved behind her. Neither of them speaking, both of them carrying the weight of what the night had been. She did not look defeated. She looked like a woman who had learned something she had not come here to learn and was deciding what to do with it. Ayla, the princess, embarked on a journey that felt anything but peaceful, despite appearances. The journey itself was surprisingly smooth, defying all her expectations of trouble and intrigue. Mornings passed into evenings without a single drop of blood being shed, an unsettling calm that only heightened her deep weariness. They passed through small northwestern cities, heading north, but her inner turmoil remained constant, a shadow she couldn't escape. Knowing she couldn't let her guard down, especially around her mother's attendants, she always anticipated betrayal. A mother's influence always brought with it a shadow of sinister plots and betrayals, a pattern she knew too well. Dark thoughts lingered, wishing for the demise of those around her, even her own brother. Yet, a strange anxiety gnawed at her as night fell, keeping her from sleep, a conflict she couldn't resolve. What if something actually happened to Vargas in the dead of night, despite her own conflicted feelings? The unsettling thought kept returning, compelling her to check on him, a primal instinct overriding logic. A desperate urge compelled her to act, to confirm his safety with her own eyes, despite her earlier dark wishes. Venturing out into the cool, moonlit forest, her heart pounded with a mix of dread and longing. In her mind, she saw him, his presence a constant, troubling fixture she couldn't erase. There he was, a quiet presence by his horse, surrounded by the soft glow of the night, almost ethereal. Hidden in the shadows, she watched, a silent observer of this private moment she shouldn't be seeing. Leaning against his horse, he made a tender gesture that softened his usual stern demeanor, revealing a different side. A gentle stroke of his hand on the animal's face was a rare display of affection that surprised and touched her. A rare peace seemed to settle over him, a stark contrast to the relentless turmoil she felt within her own soul. A blush crept onto her cheeks, a reaction she couldn't control or understand, seeing him like this. Covering her face, she felt mortified by these unwelcome feelings that stirred inside her, a forbidden longing. These emotions, unwanted and persistent, kept growing back like a stubborn tumor, impossible to excise. A yearning to escape consumed her, to simply return to the safety of her chambers and forget this moment. A rustling sound broke her reverie, and a voice called out, pulling her sharply from the dream. Startled, she gasped, realizing she wasn't alone in the forest, her private moment shattered. It was Sparkus, but he was with another girl, their figures bathed in the soft moonlight, a shocking sight. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her dream taking a painful, unexpected turn that twisted her heart. The two of them were by the water, a serene scene that hammered home the reality of her fears. The girl smiled, a gentle, innocent expression that felt like a dagger to Ayla's soul, confirming her worst suspicions. He looked at her with an intensity that Ayla had never seen directed at herself, a crushing realization. She felt a deep ache, a realization of where his true affections lay, and it wasn't with her. Kneeling, he tenderly dried the girl's feet, his concern for her palpable in the chilly air, a gesture of pure devotion. It was a scene of pure intimacy, a stark contrast to her own lonely existence and unrequited feelings. The pain was too much. She turned and fled, the rustling leaves echoing her desperate escape. Collapsing to the ground, tears streaming, she thought of how her mother would mock her weakness and vulnerability. Her mother's cold gaze haunted her, a reminder of the two stark paths laid out for her in life. One path was to claim the man she desired by any means necessary, just as her mother would have done without hesitation. The other path was to become a slightly less miserable loser, a fate she despised but also feared. She simply couldn't do it, couldn't become like her mother, couldn't resort to such cruel tactics to get what she wanted. All she could do was pray for this suffering to end, feeling utterly helpless and without agency. A knight found her, his expression a mix of relief and frustration at her disappearance. He demanded to know where she had gone, scolding her for wandering alone without an escort, his worry evident. A sharp retort followed, blaming him for losing track of her like an idiot, her anger masking her vulnerability. As she tried to get into the carriage, the knight accidentally slammed the door on her hand. A sharp pain shot through her, her eyes widening in a mix of shock and anger at the sudden injury. The knight cried out, his own hand caught in the carriage door, a moment of karmic justice for his carelessness. Muttering under her breath, she found a small vindictive satisfaction settling in, a fleeting moment of power. Letting others' words go in one ear and out the other was the first lesson she learned in the palace, a skill for survival. If she had listened to every single thing people said, she would have gone crazy long ago, consumed by their judgments. They finally arrived at the monastery, greeted by an abbot who welcomed them warmly, a momentary reprieve from her troubles. The crown prince acknowledged the abbot, noting his demi-human features with a subtle curiosity. The abbot, Basilis, confirmed his identity, explaining that such heritage was common in the northeast. The imperial procession moved forward, a grand display befitting the crown prince's arrival at this sacred site. Smiling, he basked in the welcome, understanding the significance of the sacred land where his ancestor had claimed his first victory. Basilis listened respectfully as Varka spoke of imperial tradition and divine blessings for his sister and himself. He then proposed they stay at the abbot's estate for the night, a subtle move for political favor rather than the pilgrims' quarters. The abbot readily agreed, eager to host the royal family at his residence, seeing it as a great honor. For tonight, they would relieve their journey's fatigue at the abbot's estate, a grand banquet awaiting them. Turning to his knight, he instructed him to take good care of Ayla, though his tone lacked genuine warmth. The explanation followed. It was her first time traveling so far, and she would find everything unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Yet, his words were laced with a dismissive tone, a hint of his true feelings that stung her deeply. He even wished the knight would show her a fraction of the devotion he showed his horse, a cruel comparison. Alone in the carriage, she wondered if she was finally just lying low, or if she had truly realized her place in his eyes. He had been ready to wring her neck if she caused any trouble, but she hadn't shown her face the entire trip. That filthy bastard girl, he thought, a silent venom that promised a storm yet to come, and she was trapped in its path. The Crown Prince found himself evaluating the lucrative business of the Holy Land, a thought that lingered in his mind. From the opulent interiors, it was clear that the Holy Land's wealth allowed its residents to live as lavishly as any high noble. The banquet hall downstairs had been meticulously prepared, a grand affair ready to host the evening's meal. Despite the man's unwavering loyalty, the Crown Prince couldn't shake the deep dislike he harbored for him. A persistent unease gnawed at him, a silent question about entrusting his right hand to someone who constantly put him on edge. The commander of the Rome Imperial Guard, however, remained outwardly composed, his expression betraying nothing. Our boy inquired about Isla, his fiancée, a hint of impatience in his voice. She was resting in the dormitory reserved for priestesses, too exhausted after several days of travel to attend the banquet. The commander calmly assured him that a recovery potion had been sent up, leaving no cause for concern about her well-being. A bitter thought crossed the Crown Prince's mind. At least his sister's fiancé treated her better than other women. The abbot, a figure of serene authority, gracefully welcomed the Crown Prince to the gathering. Guests began to take their seats around the long, richly laden tables, the hall buzzing with quiet anticipation. As the commander of the Rome Imperial Guard moved, his presence inevitably drew more attention than our boy felt was necessary. A soft murmur rippled through the assembled priests and guests, their gazes drawn to the imposing figure. The hushed whispers and curious glances only served to highlight the commander's undeniable, almost magnetic aura. Our boy felt a familiar irritation flare within him. The commander always seemed to steal the spotlight. A mischievous glint in her eyes, the princess made her dramatic entrance, a storm brewing in her wake. The Crown Prince's eyes widened in disbelief, his composure threatening to shatter at the sight of her. Suddenly, the grand door swung open, and the princess swept into the banquet hall, instantly commanding all attention. Her golden dress shimmered, a beacon of defiance and beauty that made every head turn in the room. A collective gasp echoed through the hall as guests stared, transfixed by her audacious arrival. With a careless flick of her wrist, a goblet of wine overturned, its crimson contents splashing across the pristine tablecloth. The Crown Prince's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the crimson stain, a symbol of her utter disrespect. Unfazed by the commotion, the princess walked directly towards our boy, a confident stride in her step. She settled into a seat opposite him, her eyes locking onto his, a challenge in her playful question about his enjoyment. A knowing smirk played on her lips as she feigned innocence, claiming she couldn't stay away once she heard he missed her. The Crown Prince clenched his fists under the table, barely containing the fury that simmered beneath his regal facade. Their exchange continued, each word a veiled jab, a public display of their strained, volatile relationship. Our boy's hands trembled beneath the table, his body shaking with the effort to suppress his escalating rage. The princess, however, continued her performance, feigning hurt at his harsh words, playing the role of the innocent sister. She insisted she had simply accepted the invitation, as if her disruptive entrance was merely a social courtesy. The tension in the room grew palpable, making the other guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Her words, sharp and deliberate, were designed to needle him, calling him too harsh on his lovely youngest sister. A hand shot out, firm and unyielding, grasping the princess's wrist to halt her provocative display. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with surprise as the commander's grip tightened around her arm. The Crown Prince's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, a dark warning about dragging the imperial family's name through the mud. Her eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity, her defiant gaze challenging him to follow through on his threats. Their faces were mere inches apart, locked in a silent, explosive confrontation that threatened to erupt. Our boy's jaw was clenched so tight it ached, the effort to maintain control, an agonizing struggle. A steady hand landed on the Crown Prince's shoulder, pulling him back from the precipice of public outrage. The commander's presence was a calming force, his silent reminder of the Crown Prince's duties diffusing the immediate threat. His gaze was firm, an unspoken command for our boy to regain his composure and remember his position. The Crown Prince felt a cold dread, realizing his sister was intentionally trying to get under his skin. He took a deep breath, the visible tremor in his hands betraying the immense effort it took to hold himself together. The princess watched him, a triumphant glint in her eyes, knowing she had successfully provoked him. Our boy finally raised his glass, forcing a strained smile as he began the customary toast to the assembly. Despite his efforts, his mind raced, haunted by the knowledge that his sister was still watching, still judging. The commander gently took the princess's hand, a silent gesture to guide her back to proper etiquette. He offered her a fresh cup, his action a subtle blend of courtesy and a quiet warning. The commander's face remained impassive, his blue eyes holding a depth of unspoken meaning. A sudden flicker of understanding crossed the princess's face, a new thought taking root in her mind. A subtle red glow emanated from her hand, a surge of power or magical effect beginning to take hold. She looked down at her dress, a thoughtful expression on her face, plotting her next move. The Crown Prince watched her, a knot of suspicion tightening in his gut, wondering what new scheme she was concocting. He dismissed her as a lowly thing, resolving not to waste any more attention on her antics. Our boy took a long sip from his cup, his mind already set on the future when he would erase her from this world. The princess, with a deceptive calm, brought her cup to her lips. A faint shimmer emanated from her hand as she held the goblet, the magic beginning to activate. A sudden intense heat spread across her skin, making her dress feel suffocatingly warm. Her face flushed with a deep crimson, a clear sign of discomfort, as she realized her mistake in wearing that particular dress. The fabric now felt sticky and oppressive, clinging to her skin in an utterly unpleasant way. The commander glanced her way, a subtle shift in his expression as he noticed her distress. Her eyes darted around, feeling intensely self-conscious, acutely aware of the unwanted attention. With a polite, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, the commander inquired if the food was to her liking. A dismissive thought flashed through her mind. The banquet's offerings were shabby compared to the imperial palace's fare. The abbot, seated nearby, looked subtly surprised by her unspoken judgment. She forced a bite of food, hoping that eating would make them cease their unwelcome conversation. The commander's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable, observing her discomfort with a quiet intensity. A wave of nausea washed over her, her stomach churning, threatening to betray her composure at the most inopportune moment. Lady Eliana, a princess haunted by her past, found herself adrift in a world of gilded cages and unspoken expectations. The weight of her lineage was a crown of thorns she wore with a practiced, weary grace. Even the devout could not escape the spectacle of the royal court, where every movement was observed. At the grand banquet, Eliana sat, an exquisite doll on a golden throne, her mind far away from the festivities. This grand party for the masses, for her, was just another stage to endure, another performance. One young man watched her departure, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a silent observer in the gilded hall. Her only desire was to escape the suffocating pretense of polite society. The echoing halls were a lonely comfort, a place where she could finally breathe, away from prying eyes. Deep sighs escaped her, a quiet acknowledgement of her own unraveling, a princess lost in her own thoughts. Our princess often wondered why she behaved this way, provoking and pushing everyone away, a pattern she couldn't break. A figure of grace, yet she felt like a ghost in her own home, unseen and unheard. Distant memories resurfaced, sharp and painful, of a young boy struggling against unseen forces, a scene of raw emotion. That day, at the former empress's memorial, a venomous whisper poisoned her young mind, planting a seed of doubt. Her mother's words, meant to comfort, instead twisted into a cruel lesson about power and perception. Young Eliana heard that Gareth was intolerable to the crown prince, even more so than she was, a comparison that stung deeply. This subtle manipulation was designed to plant seeds of rivalry and insecurity deep within her, setting her against him. From that day on, provoking him became her routine, seeking a reaction, any reaction, to prove her own existence was valid. The memory brought a bitter, self-deprecating laugh to her lips, a sound filled with the weight of her past. Convinced that if she could improve her worth through grand gestures, she would truly be nothing in her mother's eyes. Her desperation drove her to extremes, a dangerous game she felt compelled to play no matter the cost. An unexpected voice broke through her reverie, startling her from her dark thoughts. Next to her at the banquet, Gareth was now here, a shadow in the quiet corridor. Her demand was immediate, sharp with suspicion, her defenses immediately raised. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and indignation, a familiar cocktail of emotions. Her face hardened, a mask of resolve against any perceived threat. Her anger was a wall he couldn't break, too thick with years of hurt despite his efforts. Words were lost in the clatter of her own retreating steps as she walked away from him. Weakness was not an option for her, not to him, not to anyone, for fear of being consumed. Her back was ramrod straight, a shield against vulnerability, a defiant stance. Quick glances over her shoulder, filled with defiant pride, a challenge in her eyes. Twisted words echoed in her mind, the instruction to meet the crown prince's expectations, and a cruel idea formed. Overhearing her earlier, Gareth now spoke of her desire to impress the crown prince, a detail he brought up. One hand moved, a silent plea to stop her, to prevent her from making a mistake. The sudden touch, unexpected and invasive, made her flinch, her skin crawling. Screaming should have been her reaction, telling him to get lost, but her body wouldn't obey, frozen by something primal. The grip tightened, a forceful restraint that felt like a violation. An armored figure intervened, pulling Gareth away from her. Gareth, caught off guard, stumbled backward, his own plans disrupted. The newcomer's gaze was cold, assessing. A silent judgment passed between them. Confused, our princess watched as the scene unfolded before her, a whirlwind of unexpected events. Holding Gareth firmly, the crown prince conveyed a clear message in his posture, a display of authority. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild bird desperate for release. Tense, silent communications passed between the two men, an unspoken understanding. Gareth's expression was a mixture of shock and fear, his eyes wide with alarm. Offering an explanation, his words caught in his throat, choked by the situation. Firm squeezes, silent commands to silence him, to keep him from speaking. Gareth, completely trapped, was unable to resist the armored man's will. Defeated, he could only nod in submission, his defiance broken. The armored figure led him away, leaving her alone once more in the quiet corridor. Pausing, the crown prince cast a glance over his shoulder, a moment of unsettling scrutiny. Still frozen, processing the rapid turn of events was difficult for her mind, which reeled. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of cold authority, leaving her to guess his intentions. Shivering, a premonition of danger ran down her spine, a feeling she couldn't shake. Continuing down the corridor, his presence faded into the shadows, taking the tension with him. Fainter with each stride, footsteps echoed, leaving her in silence. Watching him disappear left a lingering question in her eyes about what had just transpired. Soon Gareth stood at her door, his presence a silent accusation, his eyes still on her. An intense gaze held a depth she couldn't quite decipher, a mix of anger and concern. They were outside now, the cool night air doing little to calm her nerves, only sharpening her awareness. Escorting her all the way to her quarters, his presence was unsettling, feeling more like a warning. Without warning, he halted her steps, stopping her abruptly at her door. Startled, our princess turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Pressing her against the cold stone, his proximity was overwhelming, a sudden invasion of her personal space. A face inches from hers, his breath a warm whisper against her cheek, a menacing intimacy. Fear coiled in her stomach, a cold, hard knot, tightening with every beat of her heart. Staring into her eyes, he searched for something she couldn't name, a silent interrogation. Eyes held a flicker of something dark, something dangerous, promising consequences. A hand moved to her cheek, a touch that felt more like a threat than comfort, a chilling caress. This was only the beginning. Caught, vulnerable, and trapped, she found herself in a game she barely understood. The real storm hadn't hit yet, and she was already caught in its wake. Her desperate attempt to destroy herself was met with a firm, unyielding grip, halting her tragic intent. Varkas, the man who had stopped her, looked at her with an intense, unreadable gaze, challenging her will. He spoke, his voice carrying an edge, asking if she was truly so eager to destroy herself. Leaning in, Varkas made his demand clear. She was to restrain herself until their journey was over, to avoid any unnecessary complications. His words hung in the air, leaving her speechless, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and despair at his cold resolve. Later, the man simply turned and began to walk away, leaving her standing alone in the quiet twilight. He trusted she understood his terms, his steps carrying him further into the darkening woods. In a sudden, terrifying flash, she saw herself holding a dagger, its blade glowing with a fierce, red light. Her hands, clasped together, plunged the glowing weapon into a figure before her, a horrifying vision of violence. The man she had seemingly attacked, Varkas, looked back, his face etched with pain and resignation as blood began to bloom around him. She stood in a field of white roses, the dagger raised high, having just struck him down. A closer look at her face revealed eyes wide with terror and disbelief, tears and blood streaking her cheeks. Varkas lay amidst the ruined roses, a pool of red spreading around his chest, while she stood nearby, a silent witness to her own horrifying act. Blood dripped from his mouth, a stark, painful image of his demise, emphasizing the brutal reality of her vision. The chilling vision faded, leaving her alone in the quiet night, the weight of the nightmare still heavy on her. She watched Varkas walk away again, his figure retreating into the distance, a haunting echo of the terrible dream. The young woman stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, the emotional impact of the dream overwhelming her. A choked gasp escaped her, her hand flying to her mouth as she wrestled with the disturbing images that had just assaulted her mind. Her face was a mask of anguish, tears still flowing freely, unable to shake the horror of what she had seen herself do. Varkas continued to walk, his back to her, leaving her to grapple with the terrifying premonition alone. The next day, a grand ceremony was underway, attended by solemn figures in formal robes and the crown prince. A lone woman watched from a high window, a silent observer to the proceedings below. The ceremony proceeded as if nothing had happened, a stark contrast to the internal turmoil of our protagonist. She had decided to skip the obligatory imperial family ceremony, claiming she wasn't feeling well, dismissing it entirely. The crown prince, however, insisted the ceremony proceed as scheduled, despite her absence, a subtle defiance of her will. She mused that perhaps the monastery was glad not to bestow God's blessing on a filthy bastard like her, a bitter reflection on her status. She wondered if she should have attended after all, a flicker of regret mixed with her usual spite. Varkas stood beside one of the solemn figures, his expression unreadable as the ceremony continued without her. Our protagonist lay in bed, her face shadowed, lost in thought about the man who must be so tired of her antics by now. She wished Varkas would play with fire and get burned for once, a testament to her ongoing frustration with his stoic nature. It must have been a few months before her 16th birthday, a flashback to an earlier, simpler time. A young Varkas, just turning 20, stood quietly as our protagonist called out to him. "Varkas, look," she urged, seeking his attention as she emerged from behind a dressing screen. She presented herself in a purple dress, hoping for his approval, eager to appear more mature. She was growing desperate then, trying so hard to get his attention, to make him truly see her. Varkas, ever stoic, simply regarded her without comment, his expression giving nothing away. She asked him how she looked, her voice full of hopeful expectation. His response was blunt. She looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes, and it looked terribly awful on her. Her face fell, a mix of anger and disappointment replacing her earlier hope, his words cutting deep. She swore she would make that stone-faced guy's heart race one day, a defiant promise to herself. Changing into a more revealing red dress, she wondered if it was too much, a bold move to provoke a reaction. Varkas, however, simply looked away, still offering no discernible emotion. She believed she was growing more and more like her mother every year, closer to her flawless beauty. Soon, she thought, she would be the most beautiful woman in the world, a confident assertion of her coming power. She tried another dress, asking Varkas what he thought of this one, her persistence unwavering. His gaze lingered, a subtle shift in his usual indifference that she didn't immediately notice. This was her coming-of-age ceremony dress, she explained, suggesting it was appropriate to go this far. He finally spoke, his voice a quiet sigh, telling her to go with the very first dress she had shown him. She was stunned, having assumed he wasn't paying attention at all. "What?" she exclaimed, bewildered that he had been watching so closely when he'd acted like he couldn't care less. His eyes, usually so impassive, held a glint of something she couldn't quite decipher. A mischievous smile played on her lips, wondering if he truly meant the first dress. She tried on the green dress, the one he had chosen, feeling like a fairy queen. He simply stared, a quiet intensity in his gaze, a rare moment of direct attention. She asked if he meant this one, her voice laced with a playful curiosity, testing his reaction. His gaze remained fixed on her, a profound shift in his demeanor that she couldn't ignore. His tone felt softer than before, leading her to wonder if he was also sad to part ways with her. She pulled on his arm, urging him not to just stand there blankly, but to practice the dance with her. They had been together for so long, she reasoned. It was only natural he had grown somewhat attached. A small puff of air escaped his lips, a subtle sign of his internal struggle. He allowed her to drag him along, a significant change from his previous unyielding nature. He used to never budge before, but now he was letting her lead, a clear signal of something new. The young lady, full of playful energy, urged her guard to dance faster, her movements light and joyful. She looked up at him with a wide, innocent smile, her cheeks a faint pink, feeling truly honored by his presence. The guard, however, remained stoic, his gaze distant, carrying a weight that she couldn't quite decipher. They moved through the opulent room, a dance of contrasting emotions, her happiness a bright counterpoint to his quiet intensity. With each turn, her excitement grew, pulling him into her orbit, a whirlwind of motion. They continued their dance, a beautiful if somewhat mismatched pair in the grand hall. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment a shared smile softened his features, her own radiating pure delight. A playful giggle escaped her lips, revealing the depth of her carefree joy. But then, a sudden stumble broke their rhythm, sending them both tumbling to the floor in a surprised heap. She cried out, her eyes wide with shock as they fell, completely caught off guard. The guard's face was a mask of concern, his body bracing for impact. They descended in a purple blur, the elegant dance devolving into an unexpected fall. He landed hard, the impact jarring him, a sharp jolt running through his frame. They lay there amidst the scattered fabric of her dress, tangled and disoriented on the polished floor. She quickly recovered her composure though, and glared at him, annoyed that she had fallen and blaming him for being clumsy. He simply looked at her, a question in his eyes, unsure how to respond to her sudden outburst. Still on the floor, she continued to complain, her irritation clear in her voice, refusing to let the moment pass. He reached out to help her, but in her flustered state, her hair caught on one of his buttons, pulling painfully. Her eyes widened, realizing what had happened, her expression shifting from anger to surprise. He winced, feeling the tug, his hand instinctively going to the entangled strands. A close-up showed the delicate golden hair hopelessly snared by the small metal button. She let out a yelp of pain, immediately swatting at him and calling him an idiot, a single tear welling in her eye. He watched her, a long-suffering sigh escaping his lips, clearly accustomed to her dramatic reactions. Her face contorted with frustration, her usual poise completely forgotten in the heat of the moment. He pulled her closer, gently trying to disentangle her hair, a gesture that caught her completely off guard. He reminded her, his voice low, to use her words if she had a problem rather than resorting to physical blows. His fingers carefully worked through the snarl, a delicate touch she hadn't expected from him. She leaned into his shoulder, her eyes fluttering closed, a blush creeping across her cheeks as his proximity became intensely intimate. He continued his careful work, the soft glint of a small dagger appearing in his hand as he prepared to cut the stubborn strands. His hand moved with precision, carefully isolating the tangled portion of her hair. His focus was absolute, his expression unreadable as he concentrated on the delicate task. Her face, buried in his chest, flushed a deeper red, her heart beginning to pound with an unfamiliar intensity. She struggled to process the unexpected intimacy, wondering if he was perhaps a little too close. Her hands, usually so steady, began to twitch against his chest, a strange warmth spreading through her fingertips. She noticed the faint, refreshing scent of peppermint clinging to him, a detail that oddly intensified her blush. Her face was completely crimson now, a silent "my" escaping her thoughts as she struggled to comprehend her own reaction. He continued to work, his movements precise, and she couldn't help but fret over the fate of her long, beautiful hair. Her cheeks were burning, a vivid testament to the swirling emotions within her. A close-up showed their hands, his gently holding hers, a moment of unexpected connection. Her face glowed pink, a silent question in her mind. Was she really blushing this much? Her head hung low, embarrassed by her own strong, uncontrollable reaction to his closeness. He looked down at her, a slight smirk playing on his lips, perhaps amused by her flustered state. He continued cutting her hair, the sharp snip of the blade a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy. Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and a hint of fear as the cold steel approached her scalp. He held the small knife expertly, his gaze steady, ensuring no more damage would be done. Her blushing face was still pressed against him, and she murmured, asking him not to cut off too much of her precious hair. He finished, the last snip freeing her completely, and she looked up at him with wide, relieved eyes. Her expression was a mix of gratitude and lingering shyness, her blue eyes reflecting the room's light. He rose to his feet, leaving her still seated on the floor, the sudden distance feeling profound after their close moment. She watched him, a quiet awkwardness settling between them now that the task was done, uncertain of what to do next. She held out a decorative ribbon, the one he had just freed from her hair, offering it to him as a silent gesture of thanks. He merely glanced at it before turning, walking away from her, and through the large window, she saw him disappear from view. He paused at the door, a solitary figure framed against the bright light, leaving her alone in the room. The guard left the room entirely, his departure marked by the soft click of the closing door. He let out a soft sigh as he walked away, a subtle hint of his own complex feelings. She was left alone, a hopeful smile gracing her lips as she gently placed the ribbon in a small, ornate box. Later that evening, the young lady lay in her bed, unable to sleep, a strange, fluttering excitement filling her chest. She hugged the pillow tightly, lost in a happy fantasy, wondering if perhaps this unexpected closeness meant something more. Her hopeful reverie, however, was short-lived. The devastating news of the guard's engagement to another woman would soon reach her, shattering all her quiet dreams into a million pieces. Princess Isla's world shattered when she overheard a devastating conversation, realizing the brutal truth about her beloved. From her hidden vantage point, she saw the first princess, her rival, standing distraught in the palace hall. Her heart seized as she watched the other princess, clearly in anguish, being dismissed by the man she herself deeply admired. The sight of the first princess crying, clutching at her despair, was a stark mirror of Isla's own deepest fears. A hand gripped the doorframe, a physical manifestation of her own internal struggle against the unfolding scene. She looked away, unable to bear the raw pain she was witnessing, a pain she knew all too well. The man she loved, Varkas, stood before the weeping woman, his expression utterly devoid of warmth. Isla watched from the doorway, half hidden in shadow, as the cold reality of Varkas's nature unfolded before her. The hooded woman wept openly, her shoulders shaking as Varkas held her, offering no comfort but only cold words. Varkas met the first princess's tearful gaze with an unwavering, almost cruel, indifference. Her heart ached with a chilling premonition, knowing this could easily be her own fate. The hooded woman's hands were clasped tightly together, a silent plea for affection that was brutally denied. He stated plainly that he saw no reason why his answer to her feelings should matter, for his engagement was purely political. His words cut through the air, sharp and unfeeling, as he explained that if his reasons were political, it changed nothing about the arrangement. Her hand, which had impulsively reached out, recoiled as if burned by the intensity of the scene. A soft, almost imperceptible step back marked her retreat from the painful confrontation. She fled, the sound of her running footsteps echoing the frantic beat of her own heart. Varkas turned and walked away, leaving the first princess kneeling on the floor, utterly broken. Ayla covered her mouth, her eyes welling with tears, not for the first princess, but for the stark realization of her own vulnerability. She imagined Varkas, his face stern and indifferent, fastening his cufflink as if nothing important had happened. The simple act of adjusting his sleeve conveyed a terrifying casualness to his coldness. A genuine fear of him took root in her heart, a terrifying understanding of his power to shatter someone completely. She pictured him looking at her with that same coldness if she had begged for his love. The imagined touch of his hand, devoid of warmth, sent shivers down her spine. She envisioned him pulling her hair, treating her like a nuisance, and it filled her with a profound, visceral dread. Her imagined self glared back, a mix of hurt and defiance, knowing that kind of rejection would destroy her. Varkas's face in her mind was a mask of utter detachment, confirming her deepest fears. Ayla imagined running away from him, desperate to escape the emotional pain he could inflict. This harsh truth ignited a fierce determination within her. She would not be like the first princess. She deliberately chose dresses Varkas had deemed unsuitable for her, adorning herself in rich fabrics and jewels. She started attending the regular banquets at the imperial palace, a place where she had previously avoided the public eye. Many remarked that she reminded them of her mother, Genevieve, when she was younger, noting her striking resemblance. In a hall filled with her mother's past admirers, the princess wanted to show off, to prove her worth. She basked in the attention, feeling like a goddess as countless people vied for her notice. She would become a woman more beautiful than the first princess, more radiant even than her own mother. Yet, despite all the flattery and admiration, a part of her still craved Varkas's approval, wondering why he remained so indifferent. She looked down, a hint of frustration in her expression, wishing he would acknowledge her efforts. His indifferent gaze was a constant, unwelcome presence, refusing to be swayed by her displays. She desperately wanted him to at least worry about her a little, or tried to stop her from this path. The attention from other men became overwhelming, a dizzying blur of hands and voices as they stumbled over themselves to reach her. They treated her like a beautiful, fragile porcelain doll, their hands grasping at her, their eyes dazed. Even as they called her beautiful, she felt a profound sense of unease, realizing their gaze was intoxicated by her presence, but never truly seeing her. She found herself at a card table, surrounded by men who were more interested in games than in her. One evening, playing cards with a group of nobles, she found herself frustrated as they couldn't even remember her name. They laughed, suggesting silly names like Alice, completely disregarding her identity. Her annoyance grew as they continued, calling her Helena and even Rabbit, a blow to her carefully constructed confidence. She realized she had yet to leave a lasting impression on them, despite all her efforts to be noticed. A man named Magus, however, approached her differently, pulling up a chair with a kind smile. He offered her a small wrapped gift, saying someone her age should be playing with this instead of cards. She looked at the rabbit plushie he offered, bristling at being treated like a child, yet his earnest manner intrigued her. They started building a card tower, a simple game, and she found herself genuinely amused by his company. He even playfully snatched her glass of wine, gently reminding her not to drink too much. His face was too amusing, she thought, as they continued their innocent game, a rare moment of lightheartedness. The princess found herself letting her guard down, craving the genuine affection he seemed to offer, so different from the empty flattery of the others. Varkas, ever watchful, observed from a distance, his expression unreadable as she interacted with Magus. She and Magus continued their game, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company, a quiet contrast to the noisy banquets. She laughed as the card tower inevitably collapsed, a genuine, unburdened sound she hadn't made in a long time. Magus held up a puzzle box, a thoughtful gift he had prepared just for her. 4 days before her coming-of-age ceremony, a soft knock came at her door late at night. It was Magus, holding the puzzle box, looking somewhat flustered as he stood in the doorway. He apologized profusely for the intrusion, explaining he had to leave the capital tomorrow and wanted to give her the puzzle he had worked so hard to find. The princess, despite her initial surprise, felt a warmth spread through her. She told him to come in, acknowledging this was a rare invitation. She led him to the study, the only clean place suitable for guests, a place usually reserved for her solitude. What happens next changes everything, and nobody sees it coming. The world of the Forgotten Field was one of intricate power and hidden dangers, and for Princess Dahlia, a quiet evening was about to turn into a nightmare. Her life, already fraught with political intricacies, was moments away from a violation that would shake her to her core. A soft glow filled the room as she sat across from a man engaged in a game, the quiet interaction, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. He watched her with an unsettling intensity, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The gentle facade shattered when his hand unexpectedly reached for her face, a casual gesture that made her eyes widen in surprise and a flicker of fear. The intimacy was uninvited, a clear boundary crossed. His gaze locked with hers, forcing an uncomfortable proximity that left her no room to escape. The air grew heavy with unspoken tension, suffocating her with its weight. A single tear welled in the corner of her eye, reflecting the burgeoning terror that began to grip her heart. She was a bird caught in a snare, her bright blue eyes betraying her silent plea. His eyes, however, held a chilling lack of emotion, a cold, calculating glint that stripped away any pretense of warmth. It was the look of a predator, and she was his prey. A gasp escaped her lips as his hand moved, pressing against her leg beneath the table, an invasive touch that stole her breath and ignited a deeper, more visceral fear. The violation was no longer just in his gaze. Beneath the elegant table, her small feet were hidden, a splash of pink from her underskirt, the only hint of her presence, emphasizing her vulnerability and the hidden nature of the unfolding horror. A momentary distraction had him briefly considering the game pieces, but it offered no real reprieve. She watched him, her mind racing, searching for an escape from the tightening trap. Her brows furrowed with deep worry, her lips pressed into a thin line, revealing the internal struggle she faced. The fear was palpable, etched clearly on her delicate features. Then, the man rose from his chair, his movements swift and decisive, a hand reaching for her across the table. The game was over. His true intentions were now laid bare. Standing over her, the man became a dark silhouette, his face shrouded in shadow, transforming him into a looming, oppressive presence. The room suddenly felt much smaller, suffocatingly so. His face descended, pressing uncomfortably close to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Her wide, terrified eyes reflected the stark reality of her helplessness. Pressing into her, the man's weight was heavy and unwelcome, forcing her posture to collapse under the pressure. Every inch of his touch was a violation, making her skin crawl. A shadowed face pressed against her temple, a chilling embrace that left her paralyzed with horror. She was trapped, completely at his mercy, and the realization was devastating. A possessive grip slid lower to her waist, drawing her closer against her will. The sensation was repulsive, igniting a primal urge to recoil and flee. A cold dread washed over her, a bone-deep chill that made her shiver despite the close contact. The feeling of being cornered, utterly helpless, was truly horrifying. "Let go of me," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper, her hands weakly pushing against his chest. "Wait," she tried, but her words held no power against his resolve. A slight turn had him gazing towards the window, a momentary distraction that offered a fleeting, false sense of hope. For an instant, she wondered if he might relent. Then, he buried his face into the soft skin of her neck, inhaling deeply, his actions overtly intimate and utterly repulsive. The air thickened with her rising panic. "Genevieve's hair smelled just like this," he murmured, his words a chilling comparison to her mother. The comment was meant to evoke a sense of familial connection, but instead it twisted into something grotesque and unsettling. He spoke of addiction, claiming her scent was intoxicating, drawing him in as if by an irresistible force. His twisted logic attempted to justify his predatory behavior, making her feel like an object. Fingers tightened around the delicate beads of her necklace, a symbol of her innocence now crushed by his grip. The small details underscored her complete lack of control. With a sudden burst of strength, she thrashed, sending the game pieces scattering across the floor with a loud clang. "No!" she screamed, her voice a desperate cry of defiance against her attacker. The struggle intensified, overturning the elegant table as they both crashed to the floor. The once orderly room was now a scene of chaos, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. He quickly regained the upper hand, pinning her against the cold, hard floor, his body a suffocating weight. Her desperate resistance had only delayed the inevitable, or so it seemed. Tears streamed down her face, her features twisted in a mask of pure anguish and despair. She was beyond words, her silent sobs speaking volumes of her terror. Her hand reached out, a silent, desperate plea for help into the empty air. It was a futile gesture, but instinct drove her to seek any form of salvation. He caught her outstretched hand, his grip firm and unyielding, severing her last thread of hope. There was no escape. Her struggles were met with brute force. Her arm slipped from his grasp, but it was not freedom she found. Instead, it was a slow, painful surrender. The fight was draining from her body, leaving her weak and vulnerable. Her delicate shoes lay discarded on the floor, symbolic of her stripped dignity as he pressed down on her. The room itself seemed to bear witness to her suffering. A sharp gasp tore from her throat, her eyes wide with a profound, soul-shaking terror. It was the face of someone staring into an abyss, seeing their worst fears realized. His face drew even closer, a cruel, satisfied smile playing on his lips, a stark contrast to her utter despair. He reveled in her fear, making the moment even more sickening. A forced kiss landed upon her, a horrific violation that stole her breath and shattered her spirit. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the pure, unadulterated horror of the act. A heavy body pressed down, crushing her beneath him, a heavy, inescapable weight. The world narrowed to this one terrifying point, and she felt herself fading. A hand moved to her thigh, and her body began to tremble uncontrollably, a visceral reaction to the terror. It was a tremor that shook her from the inside out, beyond her control. A mouth was at her neck, and her entire frame shook with an intense, uncontrollable shiver. She was a leaf caught in a storm, completely at its mercy. Suddenly, a shocking red burst of light erupted in the room, and she instinctively curled into herself, her mind barely registering the interruption. Was it hope, or just another horror? A dark, imposing figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light, bringing with him a sudden, violent shift in the room's atmosphere. He was here. Barkas lunged forward, his face etched with grim determination, and a spray of blood marked his brutal intervention. The fight for her freedom had just begun. The assailant lay sprawled on the floor, Barkas pinning him down with ruthless efficiency, while she watched from a distance, a silent, stunned observer to her own rescue. Tears still streamed down her face, but now they were a mixture of terror and a fragile, nascent relief. The trauma, however, was clearly deeply ingrained even in her moments of safety. Our boy held the man down, who groaned and struggled weakly beneath him. The sounds of their fight were a brutal symphony of justice, but also a stark reminder of what she had endured. The assailant's face was now a mess of pain and defeat, his struggle finally broken. He was no longer a threat, but the image of his brokenness offered little comfort. Our boy looked up, his expression grim and unyielding, his blue eyes burning with an intense resolve. He was a force of nature, protecting her with a silent fury. The man beneath him pleaded, "Let go of me, let's talk." But Barkas showed no mercy, silencing him with another forceful blow. There would be no negotiation, only consequence. Barkas's profile was resolute, a streak of blood on his cheek serving as a testament to the violence he had just inflicted. He was a guardian, but one forged in a crucible of pain. She sat on the floor, her dress disheveled, watching the scene unfold with wide, shocked eyes. The reality of what had just happened, and what had almost happened, crashed down on her. A piercing blue eye held a cold, unwavering intensity. It was the gaze of someone who had seen too much and was determined to prevent further harm. "Talia," he uttered, his voice a low rumble, then added, "Rome." He was acknowledging her, and perhaps calling out to another or remembering names that held significance to him in that moment. Turning her face away, she was unable to meet his gaze, the shame and humiliation of her ordeal overwhelming her. The tears continued to fall, a silent torrent of pain. Sitting alone amidst the wreckage of the room, she was a figure of profound sorrow, her small frame dwarfed by the enormity of her recent trauma. The silence echoed with her unspoken grief. Barkas spoke again, his voice sharp and commanding, and her eyes, still wide with shock, reflected the raw intensity of his words. She was still reeling, unable to fully process. A hand clutched at her torn dress as she slowly pushed herself up, a desperate need to escape this suffocating space driving her movements. She just needed to get away. She fled, a blur of motion, her only thought to put as much distance as possible between herself and the scene of her violation. The room was a cage, and she was breaking free. The escape was clumsy, her legs giving out, and she stumbled, falling hard to the floor, her dress tangling around her. The physical pain was a dull echo of the emotional agony. "It hurts," she whispered, tears blurring her vision, her voice choked with sobs. "Dirty," she cried, the word a raw accusation against herself, against him, against the world that had allowed this. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of horror and humiliation. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, her most broken. Hands trembled uncontrollably, the memory of her ordeal and the added shame of being witnessed overwhelming her. In such a state, she thought, the words a burning brand. The princess's face was a portrait of utter devastation, her hair disheveled, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The trauma had left an indelible mark, stripping away her composure. Varkas watched her go, his expression solemn and burdened, a silent witness to her agony. He had saved her, but the scars of this night would run deeper than any wound. This was only the beginning of a long, painful road to healing, and the choices made here would echo for a lifetime. The room held its breath. He stood at the door, blood still on his hands from whatever had just happened outside, while she sat collapsed at the foot of the bed, her hair pooled around her on the floor. Two people in the same room, miles apart. Both of them had been crying. That's what this close shot made undeniable. Her tears and his, rendered side by side in the same frame. Pain that mirrored each other without touching, without comfort, without a single word bridging the gap. He turned away. His jaw was set, his gaze cast down, the posture of someone who had decided not to speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because saying it would cost too much. He had come back to this room, bloody, beaten, still standing, and he just stood there alone in the candlelight with the door behind him open like an escape route he wasn't going to use. He had thrown himself between her and danger. That was already clear. The force of what he had absorbed still radiated off him. Whatever had been done to her, he had made sure it stopped. Her fury came out raw and ugly. She told him he should have killed the man who hurt her, not just driven him off, killed him. The words were aimed at the one person who had actually shown up to save her. Her wrists were still bound. That detail mattered more than any speech. The rope was proof of what had been done to her, and the hands reaching to undo it were his. Whatever came after between them, he did not leave her tied. She described what had been done to her in broken words. Violated, defiled, her body treated as something that did not belong to her. The crimson backdrop behind her was not just color, it was the weight of what she had been made to carry. She sat submerged in darkness, hugging herself, the ground beneath her like something rotting and alive. She warned him, if the man lived, he would come back. The fear was not anger anymore. It was a calculation born from knowing how men like that worked. She heard him come in, her whole body tensed as she turned, still gripping the hem of her dress, still shaking. He stood in the far end of the room. Just his presence in that doorway made her flinch before she could stop herself. She wept with her eyes shut, tears streaming in twin rivers down her face. There was no sound in this moment. Just grief with nowhere to go, her teeth pressed together like she was trying to hold the rest of herself from breaking apart. He said nothing. His chin was level, his lips pressed flat. Blood had dried along his jaw. He absorbed her words without flinching, not because they didn't land, but because he had already decided he would take whatever she gave him. She looked up at him, soaked through, face streaked white, her whole body still trembling inside her torn dress. This was what grief and fear looked like when they ran out of places to hide. She was not asking for comfort, she was barely holding on. He took the hits. She threw what she had at him, not words this time but force, and he stood there and let it land. The blows that hit were not the kind that marked skin. They were the kind meant to say, "You failed me." She screamed at him to leave. She said she didn't need someone like him, not a protector who let the threat walk away alive. The words came through tears and rage in equal measure. She said it twice, because once wasn't enough to make herself believe it. The words hum over him like a verdict. He should have killed him. The demand felt righteous from where she stood, but it landed on the person who had bled to get her out of that room, and he heard every word of it. She said it again. Kill him, and kill him without mercy. The voice behind those words had stopped shaking. It had gone somewhere harder. Somewhere that had already imagined every way the threat could return, and decided it couldn't afford to be soft about it. The impact of everything, her words, her grief, what he had walked into and what he had walked away from, filled the air like a detonation with no smoke, just pure force. The silence that followed was louder than the blow itself. Something had hit him, a cup, a thrown object. It grazed him and sent it spinning. He didn't raise a hand to stop it. Blood ran fresh from the cut near his eye, and he just stood there, chin down, taking it. The sound of something breaking snapped her out of herself. She looked up, wide-eyed, not afraid of him, but shocked by what she had done. For a beat, she saw him not as the person she was raging at, but as someone who was bleeding because of her. Blood ran down his face in a thin line. He did not wipe it. His eyes were steady. Not cold, not angry, just very still. The look of a man who had decided long before this moment that he would not be the one to break. Her breath caught, one eye wide, tears still wet on her cheek, her mouth slightly open. She was not crying out of grief anymore. Something had shifted. She had just seen what she had done, and it hadn't made her feel better. It had made her feel worse. He stood alone in the wreckage of what had just happened. Cushions on the floor, the room in disarray, fresh blood on his face. He did not move to clean anything up. He just stood there, and the stillness around him was heavy as stone. A drop of his blood hit the floor, then another. That small sound in a silent room was somehow the loudest thing, proof that he had bled for her and was still bleeding and had not said a word about it. He looked up. The blood had traced a line down from just above his eye to his jaw, and his gaze, both weary and sharp, carried no trace of blame. Whatever he felt in that moment, he kept it behind his eyes where she couldn't reach it. She was still crying, but differently now. Her eyes were open, searching his face, guilt beginning to replace fury. Her hands trembled as she held herself. She had wanted him to be the villain of this night, and he just kept refusing to be. His hands worked at the knots around her wrists, careful, deliberate, not rushed, not rough. The act itself was quiet, no grand gesture, no speech, just the simple work of undoing what someone else had done to her. That was all. That was enough. They were close enough to breathe the same air. His face cut and blood-streaked, hers still wet with tears. The two of them in that narrow space between what had been said and what hadn't. Neither of them looked away first. He turned and walked out. Quietly, without a word, without looking back, leaving her in a room full of pillows on the floor and candlelight and the ghost of everything that had just been said. The door did not slam. That made it worse somehow. Dawn found her still on the floor. She heard the sound of the door, a sharp creak that pulled her back into her body, and looked up. She had been sitting in that same spot since he left, which told everything about the state of the night. A fist gripped the edge of the doorframe from outside, knuckles white, cloth dark. Someone had come back to the threshold but had not yet crossed it. That pause, that held breath, spoke more than a knock would have. She slipped into the hallway, small, pale, wrapped in her nightgown in the dark corridor. Stone arches, candelabras burning low, no one else in sight. The emptiness of the passage made her look more alone than she already was. Rain had found her. She was kneeling on the floor of an open passage, her hair spread wild and soaked, her dress pooling around her like something beautiful that had been ruined. She looked up into the water falling from above, and she let it hit her. She looked down and did not speak. A single tear fell from her eye, smaller and quieter than everything that had come before. She was not raging anymore. She was just sitting with what she had done and what had been done to her and the space between. Rain, tears, no more difference between them. She clutched her own throat as if trying to hold herself together from the outside. Her expression cracked open in the softest kind of grief, the kind that comes after the anger has burned itself out and left only ash. She broke, right there in the corridor, face buried in her hands, a sound escaping her like something small and wounded. And the thought that hit her hardest was this: he must despise her now. After everything she had said, after the blood she had drawn. Months passed. The chapter closed on that night without resolution, and the next time their paths crossed, it was not in a private room. It was in front of the entire court, at the ceremony naming him commander of the Rome Imperial Guard. He knelt before the throne and received the honor he had clearly earned 100 times over. His head was bowed under the blade of appointment, his new rank draped across his shoulders. He had not just survived what happened that night. He had risen. She stood in the crowd and watched. Her face was composed, barely, in the flat, careful way of someone who had practiced not feeling things in public. She was surrounded by people and completely alone with what this moment meant to her. The hall was full. The ceremony filled the space with light and gold and the weight of imperial ritual. From the back of the crowd, she watched the two figures at the front, the king conferring and him receiving, and she did not move. He walked past her. His new cloak swept the floor, his back straight, his bearing that of a man who belonged exactly where he was. He did not look at her, but she watched him, and the emotion behind her eyes was not pride. It was something older and sadder. He stood in profile, clean, formal, dressed in his new rank. The cut near his eye was healed. The man who had bled in her room, who had stood still while she raged, who had walked out without a word, this was who he had become. She pressed her hands together and whispered one word into the space between them. Goodbye. Not out loud, not where anyone could hear. Just a word she gave him from across the room, knowing he would never receive it. She was letting go of something she had never actually held. Don't go. The words she never said aloud hung in the air, soft and pink and aching, while he walked further away. Her one visible eye was wet. She thought goodbye and felt don't go and said nothing at all. That was the whole tragedy of it. He stood in the middle of the room after the ceremony. No longer the wounded man from that night, now commander, draped in rank and gold. He looked like someone who had buried everything and built something clean on top of it. He walked out of the ceremony, and the cloak that marked his new rank swept behind him. The hall full of people who had just honored him blurred into background. He had already moved forward. The question was whether she could do the same. A royal delegation arrived in the rain. Carriages, luggage, attendants moving fast to unpack before the downpour soaked through everything. Someone in authority called the halt. A trip that was supposed to leave had been delayed, and now everyone had to adjust. She watched through glass beaded with rain. A girl behind a curtain, half hidden, studying the iron gate and the grey world beyond it. She had asked whether he was planning to stay at the monastery again. The question was casual. The interest behind it was not. The abbey's gate stood drenched in grey, rain falling in hard silver lines. An elder in white robes met two monks who bowed beneath the arches. Whatever was being said at that gate was calm and formal, but it would redirect the day for everyone inside. The abbot himself had concerns. Not about the weather, not about the roads. Something about the young man drew his attention in a way that went beyond simple curiosity. He noted that this person, a quarter elf, had managed to secure a seat of real power. That was not coincidence. The green-eyed girl sat in the carriage and turned things over in her mind. Whatever had just been decided at that gate had bought them one more day. She didn't look upset about it. There was something sharp and quiet behind her eyes. She was thinking ahead. The party was turned back at the gate. A day's delay, politely framed, carefully delivered. The carriages were already mid-departure, luggage half stowed, and now everything had to reverse. One more day in this place. One more day of proximity to someone they had not finished circling. At the gate, three figures met in the rain. The hooded guard on one side, the girl in green at his shoulder, the half-elf abbot across from them. The weight in this moment was political. Both sides were assessing something they weren't yet naming out loud. She turned her face away and let the hood fall. Something had just been said that pleased her, not visibly, not fully, but the faint smile at the corner of her mouth and the color at her cheek told a different story than her careful posture. She was the one asking to stay. Not out of warmth, not out of sentiment. Her expression was too calculated for that. She wanted proximity to the abbot, or to the monastery's influence, or to something inside those walls. She smiled like someone who had just won a small move. The abbot's face was unreadable. Pale and still as carved stone, his eyes the amber of old resin, fixed forward without warmth or welcome. He had received the request to stay, and his answer had not yet come, but his gaze said he was already calculating the cost. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, in assessment. Whatever he saw in the delegation that had just asked to remain one more day, he was measuring it carefully. Those golden eyes had seen enough to know when a courtesy mask was covering a motive. Her green eye cut sideways, sharp, alert, reading the room from beneath her hood. She had spotted something, or someone, or some shift in the weight of the air. Whatever it was, it had her full attention now. And there he was. The masked guard stood behind her, his gauntleted hand resting at her shoulder, her small form tucked into the shadow of his size. As the abbot across from them spoke the words that ended the chapter, the second princess. She was already here. And so was he. The world of Rome Goethe was often a lonely one, but the arrival of chapter 24 promised a shift in her tumultuous reality. Varkas carried a listless Dahlia through the palace halls, the elder priest following with a worried expression, his words hinting at Varkas's peculiar sensitivity toward the second princess. Rome Goethe, observing the scene, felt a pang of frustration at Varkas's constant focus on her half-sister. Varkas, however, clarified his true concern, stating his worry was for the speaker, not for Thalia, a sentiment that brought a flicker of surprise to Rome Goethe's face. His irritation was palpable, a deep-seated annoyance at the way Varkas seemed to prioritize Thalia even after 7 long years. The elder priest reminded Varkas of his majesty's trust, implying severe repercussions if the ritual proceeded without Thalia. Varkas remained unyielding, his tone dismissive of the idea of forcing Thalia to participate, even if it meant defying the king. Rome Goethe watched, surprised by the firmness of his refusal, a silent question in her eyes. He suggested they consult Thalia, believing her fickle nature might lead her to change her mind by morning. Despite this, Varkas was resolute. Their departure would not be delayed by Thalia's whims, a decision he conveyed with unwavering conviction. His blatant disrespect for her half-sister, Thalia Romgerta, grated on Romgerta's nerves, a feeling she could barely contain. A silent but echoed in her mind as she glanced at the elder, the unspoken implications of Varkas's defiance hanging heavy in the air. The court buzzed with whispers, their curious gazes following the unfolding drama, making Romgerta yearn for a quiet night away from prying eyes. Varkas, ever the protector, escorted her away, but her mind still reeled from his earlier words, wondering if something had indeed transpired. Her question about the events of the previous night was met with a curt dismissal, Varkas claiming it was nothing that should concern her. Yet, his evasiveness only confirmed her suspicion. Something significant had happened, something he was deliberately concealing. Outside, the heavy rain reflected the somber atmosphere, casting a melancholic pall over the castle grounds. Varkas walked ahead, his silence profound, lost in thoughts that seemed as heavy as the downpour around them. Romgerta observed him, a quiet sadness settling over her as she sensed the unspoken burdens he carried. Her own gaze mirrored the rain-swept world, a quiet despair reflecting in her eyes, wondering if her hopes would ever be recognized. A silent question lingered in Varkas's blue eyes, a yearning for a day when her reflection might finally fill them. He extended a gloved hand towards her, a simple gesture that spoke volumes in the pouring rain. His hand offered not just shelter, but a silent promise, a comfort that transcended mere words. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at his hand, the weight of his gesture pressing down on her heart. Varkas gently took her into his arms, sheltering her from the relentless rain and the emotional storm swirling within her. His protective embrace was firm, his gaze steady, a silent vow to keep her safe despite the world's chaos. They walked through the puddles, the rhythmic splash of their steps marking a shared moment of solace amidst the downpour. She leaned into his chest, finding a moment of peace, her face hidden from the harshness of the night. Finally, they reached the safety of the castle doors, leaving the tempestuous weather behind. A sudden, violent crack of thunder outside made her flinch, triggering a deeper, more primal fear. The sky outside the castle roared with lightning, illuminating the ancient stones in flashes of blinding white. Her eyes snapped open, wide with a terror that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. A vivid vision erupted in her mind, a woman with long, flowing white hair and piercing blue eyes, an otherworldly beauty. The ethereal woman appeared distressed, her form shimmering as if caught between worlds, an unsettling sight. Romgerta stared, paralyzed by the vision, a cold dread creeping into her heart as the scene unfolded. The vision intensified, the blue eyes of the woman seeming to bore into her very soul, a silent scream trapped within. A piercing, unearthly shriek reverberated through her mind, a sound of pure agony and despair. The spectral woman stood on a towering balcony, her white dress billowing in an unseen wind, a figure of tragic beauty. From the stormy skies, a majestic, winged figure descended, an angel that filled the air with an ominous light. The angel's attack shattered the vision, sending a shockwave through her that made her cry out in pain. The force of the hallucination threw her backward, the impact real enough to make her stumble. Varkas caught her, his voice a desperate plea of concern. Varkas, she gasped, clinging to him. He had a deep cut on his cheek, a silent testament to the physical toll of shielding her from whatever she had just experienced. Romgerta trembled uncontrollably, her body shaking from the lingering terror of the vision. She clutched her cloak, trying to regain some semblance of composure, but her mind was still reeling. Her fear began to morph into something darker, a fierce, burning anger twisting her features. Another vision flashed before her eyes, Thalia, now appearing not as a sister, but as a menacing red-haired spirit. The image confirmed her deepest fears. Thalia was the ominous presence, destined to drag her into the same abyss of sorrow that had consumed her mother. As dawn broke, the rain finally subsided, revealing Thalia standing by a window, her expression unnervingly serene. Thalia's eyes held a cold, calculating gaze, a stark contrast to the innocent facade she presented to the world. In her hand, she held a small, sharp knife, a silent threat that spoke volumes about her hidden intentions. Thalia stood in the quiet room, her presence filling the space with an unsettling calm, a predator observing its prey. She spoke with feigned concern, her words a subtle taunt about Roengerta's sleepless night. A single tear traced the path down Thalia's cheek, a perfectly performed act of false sympathy, devoid of true emotion. Roengerta's mind flashed back to a tender memory of Varkas holding her as a small, innocent child. It was her most cherished possession, the one pure memory she had clung to throughout her difficult life. For years, she had guarded that memory, a secret comfort she would revisit in her darkest moments. Now even that precious, singular bond felt tarnished, corrupted by Thalia's insidious presence, leaving her with nothing. A chilling resolve hardened her gaze. She knew what she had to do to protect what little she had left. She accepted the inevitable, knowing her actions would brand her as the evil witch who took an innocent princess's life. With a determined grip, she seized the door handle, ready to embrace her dark fate, for she had nothing left to lose. Princess Thalia found herself trapped behind a locked door, a prisoner in her own chambers. Frustration gnawed at her as she cursed Isla's name. She knew better than to act on pure impulse, understanding that a failed attempt would only lead to a pitiful demise. Thalia needed to prepare, to plan her moves with meticulous care. The journey ahead was long, and she was certain an opportunity would present itself eventually. From her window, Thalia watched, a silent observer in the grand palace, her mind already calculating the next steps. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted a familiar attendant, one her mother had assigned, meeting discreetly in the garden below. She focused, her gaze intense, trying to discern the details of the clandestine meeting. The attendant stood, listening intently, as a hooded figure approached her. Another figure, also hooded, emerged from the shadows, adding to the mystery of the encounter. Thalia peered out, her heart quickening with a sense of unease as she watched the two figures. A small vial exchanged hands, a tiny object with potentially massive implications. Thalia instantly recognized the hooded man. It was the monk from a recent banquet, now acting in secret. The attendant took the vial, her expression unreadable beneath her hood. The monk turned to leave, his task apparently complete. Thalia watched him go, a sudden realization hitting her with the force of a blow. The princess crept away from the window, her mind racing, processing what she had just witnessed. She sat on the floor, hand to her mouth, her blue eyes wide with dawning horror. The monk, she now understood, was her mother's hidden ally, operating in the shadows. She wondered, her voice barely a whisper, what on earth her mother was plotting with such a figure. Was her mother planning an assassination by poison, using this secretive monk as her agent? The thought sent a chill down her spine, a cold dread seeping into her very bones. A standard poison, she reasoned, could have been easily obtained without an outsider's help. If her mother had to resort to such complicated means to acquire it, it had to be something truly dangerous, something completely banned from the capital. Her heart pounded with a terrible premonition, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Whatever her mother was planning, it was massive, and it was about to unfold. The weight of this discovery pressed down on her, an unbearable burden of knowledge. Thalia reflected on the terrifying certainty that her mother always accomplished whatever she set her mind to. If her mother had truly made up her mind, Gareth's fate was sealed. And, if she was lucky, Isla's too, a dark hope flickering in her eyes. Her mother's resolve was absolute, a force that bent all to its will. The grand journey had begun, a long and tedious procession stretching across the land. Miles of dusty roads and open fields lay ahead, promising little comfort for the travelers. A young knight, Sir Syarkan, rode near her carriage, already looking a little weary from the heat. He sighed, the journey already proving to be a challenge. The procession moved slowly, a long line of carriages and soldiers. Sir Syarkan rode his horse, his gaze fixed on Thalia's closed carriage. He continued his ride, maintaining his position beside her transport. He worried she would roast to death inside the stifling compartment in this oppressive heat. Another soldier had tentatively suggested she let some air in, his voice filled with concern for her comfort. She had dismissed him sharply, her answer leaving no room for argument. The procession continued, the soldiers complaining, their voices echoing their misery as they trudged along. Sir Syarkan looked on with a thoughtful expression, his brow furrowed with a mix of concern and exasperation. He was a man of quiet observation, always assessing the situation, especially when it involved his charge. He tried to keep the column moving, but the rear formation kept falling behind, a clear sign of the grueling conditions. A junior officer offered a suggestion, mentioning a lake just a short distance ahead, a place where they could rest. To Thalia's irritation, Sir Siarkan listened to the greenhorn and agreed to the stop, something he hadn't done when she had spoken. She sharply reminded him that she had been listening, even if silently, her pride wounded. The conversation among the other knights turned to the future, to the unsettling thought of Sir Siarkan leaving with Isla after their marriage. That would leave only Gareth and Thalia in the Imperial Palace, a precarious situation for all involved. The order to rest was given, and Sir Siarkan rode ahead, ready to oversee the preparations. He dismounted, and the soldiers began setting up camp, relieved to escape the sun's relentless assault. Sir Siarkan approached Thalia's carriage, knocking gently on the door, urging her to come out. But there was no response, only a heavy silence from within the ornate carriage. He tried again, explaining that she'd been cooped up all day and risked collapsing from the heat. He wondered if she had actually fainted, a genuine fear creeping into his thoughts. He pulled back the curtain, and a blast of hot air, thick with a sweet, almost intoxicating scent of honey and milk, hit him. Inside, Thalia lay still, seemingly unconscious, the heavy air swirling around her. He reached for her, concerned, noting how surprisingly light she felt in his arms. He gently urged her to wake up, his voice tinged with worry. Her eyes slowly fluttered open, then snapped wide, fixed on him with a furious glare. She stirred, pushing away from him, her voice sharp with accusation. She thought he had taken advantage, that he believed she had truly fainted and would try something funny, her anger a sudden storm. He vehemently denied it, but her hand flew out, delivering a stinging slap across his face. He reeled back, shocked by her sudden violence, his hand flying to his cheek. She simply told him to get out, her face a mask of cold fury, her resolve unyielding. He tried to reason with her, reminding her they still had half a day of travel, and she couldn't stay in the stifling carriage. The journey continued through treacherous lands, and for Varkas, a personal guard, the challenges were far from over. After a long day of travel, he splashed cold water on his face, the exhaustion of the journey weighing heavily on him. He couldn't help but think of the princess, still as stubborn as ever in her refusal to cooperate. He wondered if she was always on guard, constantly afraid that someone might harm her like a trapped beast. He questioned why he even tried to understand her. He knew she frequently replaced her personal guards, so he expected to be swapped out soon enough. He just had to hold out until the journey ended. Fortunately, once noon passed, the air gradually began to cool, offering some respite from the harsh travel. After a long, hard journey, they finally passed the Geisa Mountains, which divided the east and the northeast. Their destination for the day was the Sinai Plains, a vast territory that once belonged to the former Balto Kingdom. As evening approached, they decided to camp there for the day, and orders were given to set up a barricade around the campsite. He watched the other guards, noting how surprisingly fresh he still looked despite riding horses all day. He had been on horseback just as long as the others, yet the fatigue seemed to bypass him. The sound of hammering filled the air as the barricades went up. He thought it seemed a bit excessive for their current location. Another guard explained that many beasts lived around here, and while they rarely attacked large-scale armies, caution was advised. Soon, the barricades were complete and the guards confirmed their readiness. It certainly didn't hurt to be careful. Later, at the cooking fire, our boy felt his stomach rumbling. He asked if Her Highness's meal had been served yet. The cook replied that the princess had no appetite, a response that immediately filled him with irritation. She had skipped lunch, and now dinner too. He couldn't believe her stubbornness. He felt a surge of frustration, wondering why she was acting like a child and whining about her food. He instructed a servant to pack some decent food into a basket, unable to completely ignore her plight. He told himself there was no need to force food on someone who insisted they didn't want to eat. But despite his internal protests, he found himself carrying the basket towards her carriage anyway. The basket felt so light in his hands, a stark reminder of how little she had consumed that day. He approached her carriage in the dim light of dusk, announcing that he had brought her dinner. He cursed his own meddling nature, knowing he was probably just inviting more trouble. From inside, she curtly told him that she wasn't eating, her voice sharp and dismissive. He tried to reason with her, explaining that she had practically been starving all day and couldn't endure the harsh journey without proper nourishment. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with anger, and told him she was fine and to get lost. He thought to himself that even a hedgehog wouldn't be this prickly, her demeanor completely unyielding. He decided to leave the food out front, hoping she might change her mind later, then walked away with a heavy stomp. Her gaze followed him, filled with disdain, as she questioned if her words sounded like a joke to him. With a sharp slam, she shut the carriage door, the sound echoing through the quiet camp. He looked back at the closed door one last time before sighing and deciding he had done enough. Back at the campfire, the other guards were eating heartily, their hunger satisfied after the day's travel. My guy joined them, still feeling annoyed as he took a large bite of his own food. He told himself he didn't care if that wretched woman starved or not, trying to convince himself of his indifference. As night deepened, the camp settled into a quiet rhythm, with only the rustling of leaves and chirping of crickets disturbing the peace. Inside her tent, Princess Ayla lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts and worries. She wondered when they would finally make their move, the anticipation a heavy burden on her mind. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a harsh reminder that she hadn't eaten properly in days. She briefly wondered if it would have been better to eat the food that stupid guard had brought her. No, she quickly dismissed the thought. People who approached with a harmless exterior were often the least trustworthy. The night seemed to stretch on, quiet and still, leading her to believe that tonight would pass without incident. But then, a faint rustling sound broke the silence, immediately catching her attention. She cautiously peered out of her tent, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. Through the darkness, she spotted a figure moving stealthily through the camp. It was that woman, one of the informants her mother had planted. The woman was heading directly towards Ayla's carriage, moving with an eerie quietness. Ayla watched, a dark thought crossing her mind. How great it would be if the woman went in there and did what Ayla had to do instead. She followed the woman's movements, wondering how far she intended to go. Her eyes widened in surprise as she realized the woman was heading towards Vargas's tent. Ayla's gaze sharpened, her mind racing as she tried to understand the implications of this unexpected turn. The informant disappeared into Vargas's tent, leaving Ayla alone with her thoughts. Ayla, unable to resist her curiosity, cautiously made her way to Vargas's tent and slipped inside. The tent was empty, just as she had half expected. Of course he wouldn't be here. Vargas began his routine before dawn, she recalled, probably patrolling the camp or with Torque. She scanned the tent, looking for anything out of place, perhaps a bloodstain or some other clue. Her eyes landed on an object, and her expression immediately shifted to one of shock and alarm. A sudden thump of a heart against her ribs. Vargas stood at the entrance, asking what she was doing there. His expression was a mixture of confusion and suspicion, a clear challenge in his eyes. He moved swiftly, grabbing her arm and demanding that she stop right there. She struggled against his grip, her anger flaring as she shouted at him to let her go. She knew she couldn't afford to be caught here, her resolve hardening in that moment. With a desperate burst of strength, she kicked him, aiming to create an opening for her escape. He cried out in pain, his grip momentarily loosening as he recoiled from the unexpected blow. Seizing the opportunity, she broke free and bolted out of the tent, leaving him stunned behind her. His face contorted in a furious snarl as he watched her flee, the pain momentarily forgotten in his outrage. She reached her carriage and, with another decisive slam, shut the door, securing herself inside. Inside, she sank down, tears welling in her eyes as she silently questioned why he had to do that. Back in his tent, Vargas sat in a state of profound distress, the implications of what had just happened weighing heavily. His mind raced, wondering if Gareth, the crown prince, had noticed her suspicious behavior. He desperately hoped that Gareth hadn't seen anything, the consequences of such a discovery too dire to contemplate. The thought of Gareth finding out filled him with a chilling dread, knowing it could jeopardize everything. He knew he had to cover this up to ensure that no one else ever learned of the princess's clandestine visit. The secret of that night would remain buried, a silent pact forged in the shadows, its true meaning known only to him.